"You are the biggest failure in this family," my sister hissed, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the crowded country club ballroom. Valerie gripped the stem of her crystal flute, the knuckles of her manicured hand turning stark white. She stood beside a towering, illuminated champagne pyramid, draped in custom crimson silk, glaring at me with unvarnished disgust. "You are making me look bad in front of my lawyer friends," she snapped, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "Get out!" I did not shrink back. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I simply looked at my 26-year-old sister, absorbing the public humiliation while 50 elite guests paused their conversations to watch the spectacle. I smoothed the fabric of my thrifted navy dress, maintaining absolute silence. What Valerie did not know, what none of these sneering socialites knew, was that the prestigious law firm she just joined was currently suffocating under millions of dollars in toxic debt. She had absolutely no idea that the anonymous corporate executioner hired to gut her entire department was the very sister she had just banished. Have you ever been pushed out of the room by the exact people you sacrificed everything to save? Hit like and subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Let me step back exactly 45 minutes before that catastrophic confrontation. The Oak Ridge Country Club radiated a suffocating aura of manufactured prestige. I walked through the gilded revolving doors, my sensible flats sinking into the plush, crimson carpeting of the grand foyer, crystal chandeliers suspended from vaulted ceilings cast a harsh, unforgiving glare over the sprawling space. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided through the crowd, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with caviar and imported truffles. A string quartet played a classical concerto in the corner, the music struggling to compete with the loud, arrogant laughter of the city's legal elite. My parents had spared absolutely no expense. Massive floral arrangements towered over the mahogany dining tables, and a life-sized ice sculpture of the scales of justice dominated the center of the room. They had leveraged multiple high-interest credit lines to fund this opulent display, all to celebrate Valerie securing a junior associate position at Kensington & Reed. I stood near the entrance, a 32-year-old woman wearing a simple, off-the-rack navy dress. I kept my posture rigid, observing the reckless financial hemorrhage with the clinical detachment of a corporate auditor. 10 years ago, I held an acceptance letter to a prestigious law program. During that exact same week, the bank nailed a bright orange foreclosure notice to the front door of our family home. I did not hesitate. I quietly surrendered my tuition deposit, withdrew my enrollment, and funneled every single dollar I earned from grueling 80-hour work weeks into saving my parents from total bankruptcy. They survived the financial crisis solely because I absorbed the impact. Yet, the absolute second the mortgage cleared, they developed profound, convenient amnesia regarding my sacrifice. They poured their redirected resources entirely into Valerie, grooming her into their pristine golden child. I became the invisible workhorse, the discarded scapegoat, while my sister ascended the academic ladder funded by my silenced ambitions. Liliana. The sharp clip tone severed my quiet reflection. I turned to find my mother, Brenda, marching toward me. She wore a heavy beaded gown that dragged across the marble tile, her neck wrapped in a thick strand of cultured pearls. She did not offer a greeting. She did not embrace me. Her eyes immediately dropped to my scuffed leather flats, her mouth twisting into a tight, disappointed line. "You actually wore that," Brenda muttered, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding socialites. She reached out and flicked the collar of my blazer with 2 manicured fingers. "I told you Kensington & Reed partners are attending tonight. You look like a substitute teacher. Could you not find something presentable?" "I came to congratulate my sister," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of defensive anger. Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Valerie is mingling with the senior associates. She needs to project an image of generational success. Just stay near the perimeter and do not draw attention to yourself. We cannot afford any embarrassments tonight." She turned on her heel and marched away, seamlessly transitioning her scowl into a radiant, artificial smile as she greeted a passing judge. I followed her instructions, retreating toward the shadowed perimeter of the ballroom. I claimed a spot near the towering champagne pyramid, nursing a glass of sparkling water from my vantage point. I watched Valerie hold court. She threw her head back, laughing loudly at a joke told by one of the mid-level partners. She thrived in the spotlight, feeding off the validation of the tailored suits surrounding her. I watched her gesture expansively, a heavy diamond tennis bracelet catching the light on her wrist. I recognized the jewelry. My father, Gregory, had financed it just last week. They were constructing a fragile house of cards, stacking debt upon debt to maintain an illusion of aristocratic supremacy. Valerie turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the ballroom, her eyes locked onto mine. The manufactured warmth vanished from her face instantly. Her smile collapsed into a rigid, furious glare. She whispered something to the partner beside her, excused herself from the circle, and marched directly toward my corner of the room. Her heels struck the polished floorboards with an aggressive, rhythmic tempo. She closed the distance rapidly, invading my personal space before I could even set my water glass down on the nearest cocktail table. "What are you doing standing here?" Valerie hissed, her voice vibrating with unvarnished malice. "I was invited," I stated, maintaining eye contact without a single flinch. "Mom invited you out of pity," Valerie countered, her chest heaving with arrogant indignation. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the slightly frayed cuff of my sleeve. "You are hovering near the drinks like a pathetic beggar. Do you have any idea who is in this room? These are the top corporate litigators in the city. They handle complex corporate acquisitions. They do not associate with college dropouts." I remained perfectly still. I did not remind her that my dropout status was the sole reason she possessed a roof over her head during middle school. I did not explain the brutal years I spent building Pinnacle Restructuring Group from a single rented desk into a ruthless auditing empire. "I am not speaking to your colleagues, Valerie," I said, my tone flat and unbothered. "Your mere presence is an insult," she snapped, stepping closer, her breath smelling of expensive champagne and blind entitlement. "Montgomery warned me you would try to ride my coattails tonight. He said you would show up looking like a peasant just to drag my reputation down." She gripped the stem of her crystal flute, the knuckles of her manicured hand turning stark white. The music from the string quartet seemed to fade into the background as the confrontation reached its boiling point. 50 elite guests paused their conversations, their heads turning to watch the spectacle unfolding near the champagne display. This brings us back to the exact moment the trap was set. "You are the biggest failure in this family," my sister hissed, repeating the words that echoed across the silent room. "You are making me look bad in front of my lawyer friends. Get out." I absorbed the public humiliation without a single outward reaction. I looked at the smug, vindictive expression plastered across her face. I looked at my mother standing 12 feet away, watching the execution while taking a slow sip of her wine, completely refusing to intervene. Their silence signaled their absolute agreement. I did not argue. I did not throw my water glass or demand respect. I simply offered my sister a cold, unsettling smile that caused a microscopic fracture in her arrogant facade. "Enjoy your evening, Valerie," I murmured, my voice projecting a terrifying quiet gravity. I turned my back on the glittering ballroom. I walked with deliberate, heavy steps across the plush carpet, forcing the whispering socialites to step aside and clear my path. I stepped out into the freezing night air, completely unbothered by her insults, knowing my sister had no idea who she had just banished into the dark. I drove my rusted decoy sedan 3 blocks past my actual address, descending seamlessly into the highly secured underground garage of a minimalist high-rise. The heavy iron gate rolled shut behind me, sealing out the freezing night wind and the manufactured glamour of the country club I had just left. The battered engine of my sedan ticked as it cooled, echoing in the cavernous, climate-controlled concrete bunker. I parked the aging vehicle in a reserved corner bay, completely isolated from the sleek imported sports cars occupying the adjacent spaces. The contrast perfectly mirrored my existence. To my family, I remained the stagnant, destitute dropout tethered to a failing vehicle. They demanded I project that exact image to validate their own superiority. I willingly supplied the illusion. I crossed the polished concrete floor and pressed my palm against the biometric scanner panel beside the private elevator. The machine read my fingerprints, confirming my clearance, and the brushed steel doors parted instantly. The cabin whisked me upward in complete silence, ascending 40 stories above the glittering city grid. The doors opened directly into my sprawling, heavily fortified penthouse, 3,000 square feet of dark slate flooring, floor-to-ceiling glass, and austere architecture stretched out before me. The space possessed no photographs, no cluttered heirlooms, and absolutely no traces of the chaotic family I had just escaped. It was a fortress of absolute silence. I walked straight to the master suite and unzipped the cheap, thrifted navy dress. I let the synthetic fabric pool around my ankles on the cold marble floor. I stepped out of the scuffed leather flats, kicking them aside. I pulled a heavy, charcoal silk robe from my closet, wrapping the premium fabric around my shoulders. The transition felt instantaneous. The invisible, pathetic scapegoat vanished, replaced entirely by the apex predator my family could not even begin to comprehend. I moved into the sprawling kitchen, my bare feet padding softly across the stone tiles. I pulled a crystal tumbler from the overhead cabinet and filled it with sparkling water. The sharp, cold effervescence bit the back of my throat, washing away the lingering, stagnant taste of the country club champagne. I carried the heavy glass down the long hallway, stopping before a solid oak door sealed by a secondary security keypad. I punched in a 12-digit alphanumeric sequence. The heavy deadbolt retracted with a solid, mechanical clack. I stepped into my private war room. The space housed no windows, remaining entirely insulated from the outside world. A massive obsidian desk dominated the center of the room, flanked by towering server racks that hummed with a low, steady vibration. I set my crystal tumbler on the polished wood and pressed my thumb against the biometric ignition switch embedded in the desk surface. 3 curved, ultra-high-definition monitors flared to life simultaneously. They cast a pale, icy blue glow across my face. The encrypted operating system booted rapidly, bypassing standard firewalls and establishing a secure uplink. In the center of the primary screen, a sleek, brushed steel logo materialized Pinnacle Restructuring Group. I built this corporate auditing empire from absolute scratch. 10 years ago, I surrendered my law school tuition to save my parents from a devastating bank foreclosure, while they willfully erased my sacrifice and poured their remaining funds into grooming my younger sister. I channeled my silent fury into mastering the mechanics of corporate collapse. I learned how to dissect failing conglomerates, identify toxic debt, and ruthlessly sever bloated departments to save the structural foundations. I operated exclusively in the shadows, utilizing non-disclosure agreements and proxy executives to mask my identity. My clients only knew me as the absolute architect of their financial salvation or their total ruin. I tapped the mechanical keyboard, bringing up the highly classified financial dossiers I had received exactly 48 hours ago. The target displayed on the center monitor was Kensington & Reed. It was the exact prestigious law firm that had just hired Valerie. It was the same firm she had weaponized against me at the gala, boasting about her elite colleagues and generational success. I scrolled through their internal ledgers, reading the undeniable truth hidden beneath their bespoke suits and mahogany offices. Kensington & Reed was actively hemorrhaging cash. The digital columns bled red across my screen. The firm had severely over-leveraged their commercial real estate holdings, signing predatory lease agreements for their downtown high-rise right before the market experienced a massive contraction. Their senior partners refused to adapt, continuing to draw exorbitant, multi-million-dollar bonuses while their client acquisition rates plummeted by 40% over the past 3 fiscal quarters. They were not a bastion of legal elitism. They were a sinking ship, taking on water faster than their accounting department could bail it out. I opened the secondary file, tracing the specific expenditure reports assigned to the junior and mid-level partners. The firm was drowning in toxic debt generated by bloated expense accounts, unverified client dinners, and aggressive shadow billing practices The structural rot permeated every single level of their hierarchy. Valerie believed she had secured a lifetime ticket to the upper echelon of society. She had absolutely no idea she had just boarded a vessel destined for the ocean floor. I shifted my attention to the final encrypted document resting on the third monitor. It was a formal, legally binding restructuring contract. Sylvia Kensington, the senior managing partner and primary stakeholder of the firm, had quietly reached out to Pinnacle Restructuring Group 3 weeks ago. She recognized the terminal decay infecting her legacy and understood that her internal board possessed too much arrogance to enact the necessary amputations. She required an outside executioner. I read the specific clauses Sylvia had authorized. The contract granted my auditing firm absolute, unilateral authority to gut their bloated departments. It provided me with unrestricted access to their internal servers, their billing logs, and their human resources records. The mandate required me to identify the dead weight, expose the financial liabilities, and terminate any employee deemed toxic to the firm's survival, regardless of their rank or seniority. Sylvia Kensington's verified digital signature anchored the bottom of the page, officially executing the agreement. I leaned back in my heavy leather executive chair. Picking up my crystal tumbler, I took a slow sip of the sparkling water, letting the profound, devastating irony wash over me. Just an hour ago, Valerie stood beside a champagne pyramid, her face twisted in absolute disgust. She called me the biggest failure in the family. She ordered me out of her sight, terrified that my mere presence would ruin her pristine reputation in front of the very colleagues she desperately wanted to impress. She mocked my thrifted clothes and my invisible existence. I watched the cursor blink steadily on the glowing monitor. The failure she had just banished possessed the unchallengeable legal mandate to dissect her entire career. I held the keys to the kingdom she desperately worshipped. Every single elite lawyer she fawned over at the country club gala would soon be forced to justify their professional existence to my auditing team. The power dynamic Valerie fabricated in her mind was a complete, tragic illusion. She was a pawn dancing on a chessboard I entirely controlled. I did not feel a sudden surge of vindictive rage. I did not desire to call her and scream my title into the phone. The satisfying weight of true power resides in absolute patience. I possessed the discipline to let her build her fabricated high society life, secure in the knowledge that I controlled the exact detonation sequence required to level it to the ground. I closed the encrypted file with a sharp keystroke, allowing the trap to remain perfectly hidden in the digital shadows while my family prepared their next offensive. The sharp buzz of my burner phone shattered the quiet peace of my Sunday morning. I stood in the sprawling, sunlit kitchen of my penthouse, watching the early light fracture across the polished granite island. I maintained 2 separate cellular devices to navigate my bifurcated existence. My primary encrypted smartphone orchestrated the global operations of Pinnacle Restructuring Group. The second device, a scratched, prepaid model encased in cheap plastic, anchored my fabricated identity as the destitute, struggling scapegoat. It functioned exclusively to absorb the relentless, toxic demands of my family. I reached across the counter and picked up the vibrating plastic. The digital display flashed Brenda's name. I swiped the green icon to accept the call. My mother did not bother with a greeting. She allowed the connection to engage for barely a fraction of a second before launching her verbal assault. She bypassed the previous night's cruel expulsion entirely. She offered 0 apologies for watching Valerie publicly banish me from the country club ballroom. In Brenda's manufactured reality, my public humiliation was merely an acceptable collateral casualty in their relentless pursuit of aristocratic validation. "Liliana, listen to me closely," Brenda commanded, her voice tight and vibrating with frantic, nervous energy. "Montgomery officially proposed to Valerie last night after you caused that scene and left. He gave her a 3-carat cushion-cut diamond. The ring is flawless." I leaned against the heavy marble island, tracing the rim of my ceramic coffee mug with a steady finger. I did not offer congratulations. I knew exactly who Montgomery Hayes was. He served as a mid-level partner at Kensington and Reed. He perfectly mirrored Valerie's hollow ambition. masking a foundation of mediocre legal talent beneath bespoke Italian tailoring and leased European sports cars. They were two parasites feeding off the same fabricated prestige. "We are hosting an engagement gala next month at the downtown Botanical Gardens," Brenda continued, her pace accelerating into a breathless sprint. "Montgomery's senior partners expect a certain caliber of hospitality. We require immediate liquid capital to secure the caterers, the string quartet, and the imported floral deposits. Require," I repeated, letting the single sharp syllable hang in the silent kitchen. "Yes, require," she snapped, her tone hardening. "Your father and I checked the routing statements on your accounts. We know you have been hoarding cash from those odd bookkeeping jobs you take. You possess exactly $40,000 sitting completely idle in your savings account." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The $40,000 she referenced represented the absolute maximum amount I allowed them to see through my decoy bank statements. I specifically engineered that account to portray the meager life savings of a woman who had scraped together pennies over a decade of grueling, low-level clerical labor. To them, it was a fortune. To Pinnacle Restructuring Group, it was barely a rounding error. "That capital is reserved for medical emergencies and my rent," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level and devoid of emotion. "This is an emergency," Brenda shrieked, her manufactured composure instantly fracturing. "Valerie needs to project generational wealth to Montgomery's colleagues. If we host a cheap, pathetic event, they will scrutinize our background. You are going to initiate a wire transfer this afternoon. You will send the entire $40,000 to your father's primary checking account before the banks open tomorrow." I set the ceramic mug down onto the marble counter. The ceramic clinked sharply against the stone. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to reason with a woman actively drowning in her own delusions of grandeur. "No," I replied. "I will not subsidize an illusion." The refusal hit the line with the devastating force of a physical blow. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the cellular connection for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the eruption occurred. "You selfish, ungrateful disgrace," Brenda screamed, the sheer volume forcing me to pull the cheap plastic receiver a few inches away from my ear. "We fed you. We housed you. You dropped out of law school and amounted to absolutely nothing. And now you refuse to support the only daughter in this family who actually achieved success." She conveniently omitted the reality of my departure from academia 10 years ago. My withdrawal from law school explicitly prevented the bank from seizing the very roof over her head. She erased my sacrifice to protect her fragile narrative. She needed me to be the villain so she could justify her relentless exploitation. "If you do not transfer that money by tomorrow morning, you are permanently disowned," Brenda threatened, her voice cracking into a hysterical, jagged pitch. "Do you understand me? Liliana, we will cut you out of this family forever. You will die alone in that pathetic, rotting studio apartment you rent, and we will not attend your funeral." I pressed the red icon on the screen, instantly terminating the call. I did not defend my decisions. I did not remind her that she possessed zero actual authority over my existence. I simply severed the connection, letting the dead air absorb her venomous tantrum. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The city hummed with quiet, Sunday morning indifference. The winter sun reflected off the towering glass skyscrapers, illuminating the exact financial district I had quietly conquered. Barely 5 minutes passed before the prepaid device buzzed again against the marble counter. This time, the screen illuminated with a rapid succession of text messages. The sender was Valerie. She had clearly received a frantic, tearful update from our mother regarding my swift refusal to surrender my decoy savings. I picked up the phone, unlocked the cracked screen, and read the digital venom. "You truly are a pathetic, jealous failure." The first message read, "Montgomery and I reviewed the financial support laws in this state." The second message continued, He is a partner at Kensington and Reed. We possess the legal prowess to drag you into civil court for familial negligence. We will freeze your pathetic bank accounts. We will garnish whatever minimum wage paycheck you scrape together. We will ensure you are left with absolutely nothing. A third message arrived seconds later. Transfer the $40,000, or Montgomery will personally destroy your life by Friday. You do not mess with elite lawyers. Liliana. I stared at the glowing pixels. Valerie truly believed she wielded an executioner's axe. She assumed her new fiancé possessed the untouchable legal authority to crush a solitary, defenseless dropout. She fundamentally failed to understand that the law firm Montgomery used as a shield currently sat directly in the crosshairs of my corporate auditing scope. Montgomery was not an apex predator. He was a bloated liability waiting to be excised. He was a secondary target that had just volunteered to step onto the killing floor. I did not reply to the threats. Engaging with cornered. Arrogant thieves only validates their perceived power and feeds their desperation. Instead, I executed a simultaneous button press on the side of the plastic device, capturing high-definition screenshots of every single menacing text message. I opened a secure, encrypted routing application hidden deep within the burner phone's operating system. I uploaded the captured images directly to the private server housed in my windowless war room down the hall. The digital files locked into place with a quiet electronic chime, establishing a verified, time-stamped record of their extortion attempts. I cataloged the evidence meticulously, adding it to the growing forensic dossier I was building against Montgomery and Valerie. Every arrogant threat they documented provided another nail for their professional coffins. They believed they were backing a helpless animal into a corner, utilizing brute psychological force and legal intimidation to extract capital. In reality, they were actively mapping their own destruction, handing me the exact documentation required to dismantle their fabricated careers line by meticulous line. I set the cheap burner phone face down on my marble counter, recognizing that their blind entitlement had officially crossed the line into active malice. My encrypted banking monitor flashed a sudden, glaring red alert across the screen 48 hours later. Tuesday morning hung heavy and quiet outside the thick, windowless walls of my private war room. Inside, the towering server racks hummed with a steady, cooling vibration. Anchoring the nerve center of Pinnacle Restructuring Group, the alert did not originate from my primary corporate accounts, which remained shielded behind layers of international encryption. Instead, the blinding crimson notification pulsed from a secondary, low-level monitoring algorithm. I had specifically tethered this algorithm to my public-facing identity, the impoverished, invisible decoy persona my family believed constituted my entire existence. I pressed my palm against the biometric mouse, bypassing the screensaver, and expanded the notification. A major national credit bureau had just logged a hard, unauthorized inquiry against my Social Security number. I did not reach for my burner phone to demand answers. I did not storm out of my penthouse to confront them. I leaned closer to the high-definition display, my eyes tracking the digital breadcrumbs illuminating the dark screen. The inquiry originated from an exclusive, high-end European auto dealership located in the wealthy northern suburbs of the city. I initiated a backdoor trace, my fingers striking the mechanical keyboard with rapid, precise force. I tunneled through the dealership's poorly secured external financing portal, scraping their active underwriting database. The documents populated my center monitor in rapid succession, painting a stark, undeniable picture of unmitigated greed. A primary financing contract materialized. The purchase involved a top-tier, midnight blue Mercedes-Benz, heavily loaded with custom interior modifications and a performance package. The total financed amount hovered just north of $140,000. I scanned the loan terms. The dealership had locked them into a predatory 22% interest rate with a massive balloon payment scheduled for the final year. It was a financially suicidal contract, designed to trap desperate buyers who prioritized optics over equity. I moved my gaze to the applicant information. Valerie occupied the primary purchaser slot. However, her meager starting salary as a junior associate and the massive, crushing weight of her already maxed-out credit cards resulted in an immediate, automated denial from the dealership's underwriting software. She possessed zero actual purchasing power. She needed a co-signer with an unblemished financial history to force the transaction through the approval algorithms. I scrolled down to the secondary applicant field. My full legal name, my public decoy address, and my exact 9-digit social security number occupied the required boxes. Beneath the typed information rested a verified, legally binding electronic signature. My parents, operating under the arrogant, misguided legal counsel of Montgomery, had deliberately committed identity theft. I pieced their strategy together by dissecting the metadata embedded deep within the electronic contract file. Montgomery possessed a law license and intimate, working knowledge of digital notary loopholes. He understood exactly how to bypass the dealership's secondary verification prompts. He manipulated the electronic signature software, masking the geographic location to simulate my physical presence at the signing. He assumed my fabricated poverty meant I lacked the financial literacy to monitor my credit profile, or worse, lacked the resources to challenge a binding legal contract in civil court. The unauthorized credit pull caused a minor, localized hit to my public credit score. To the billionaire CEO of Pinnacle Restructuring Group, a 10-point drop on a decoy profile meant absolutely nothing. To the arrogant thieves who executed the maneuver, it constituted a catastrophic, fatal error. They had officially crossed the threshold from toxic entitlement directly into severe federal criminality. Instead of calling them to scream in righteous indignation, I calmly unleashed my corporate forensic team. I opened a secure, heavily encrypted internal communication channel, routing a priority directive to my elite cyber investigation division. I commanded them to deploy our proprietary tracking algorithms against the dealership's digital footprint and lock down the data trail before the temporary server caches wiped the history. Within 20 minutes, raw, irrefutable data flooded my terminal. I watched the green text cascade down my secondary monitor. My forensic team meticulously gathered the digital internet protocol logs, isolating the exact geographic coordinates where the fraudulent contract was signed and transmitted. The location did not map to the dealership. The coordinates mapped directly to the wireless router sitting in my parents' living room. We extracted the specific device identification numbers attached to the digital signature. The electronic forgery was executed on an expensive, firm-issued tablet. The serial number registered directly to Montgomery's secure account at Kensington and Reed. He had personally facilitated the wire fraud, utilizing his employer's heavily monitored hardware to finalize a federally regulated financial document. He had just tied his entire law firm to a federal crime. I highlighted the exact timestamp of the transaction. The digital ink dried at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday evening. While I was packing a single duffel bag and abandoning my decoy apartment during their illegal eviction attempt, they were sitting on their couch, plotting my financial ruin to secure a leather-upholstered status symbol for their golden child. I compiled the evidence, stacking the data points into an impenetrable digital vault. I possessed the forged electronic signatures, the internet protocol logs, the device identifiers, and the dealership transfer receipts. It constituted an airtight, undeniable federal wire fraud and identity theft case. If I challenged the loan immediately, the dealership's fraud department would cancel the transaction, dispatch a recovery team to reclaim the vehicle, and leave my family dealing with a localized civil dispute. I refused to let them escape that easily. I needed them to drive that stolen asset right into the absolute center of my trap. I accessed the administrative mainframe of the major credit bureaus, utilizing my executive clearance to bypass the standard consumer portals. Instead of reporting the identity theft, I placed a silent, impenetrable freeze on my public assets. I locked the decoy credit profile entirely, establishing a permanent barrier that would reject any future inquiries, while deliberately leaving the existing Mercedes loan active and entirely untouched. I deliberately allowed them to believe their petty theft had succeeded. Right now, Valerie was likely running her manicured hands over the steering wheel of her new luxury vehicle, gloating to Montgomery about her perceived aristocratic superiority. She believed she had successfully outsmarted her destitute sister, weaponizing my clean credit history to fund her manufactured high society illusion. She felt untouchable. She had absolutely no idea that she was currently driving a mobile federal indictment. I routed the compiled forensic dossier to the heavy-duty laser printer, housed in the shadowed corner of my war room. The machine roared to life, the internal rollers humming as it spit out crisp, warm pages of damning evidence. I stood up from the obsidian desk and gathered the thick stack of papers. The black ink detailed the exact, unforgiving mechanics of Montgomery's criminal conspiracy and Valerie's complicit. Staggering greed. I aligned the edges perfectly, the sharp snap of the heavy paper echoing in the windowless room. I slid the documents into their designated protective sleeves. I locked the undeniable proof of their federal crimes inside a heavy black leather portfolio, content to let them drive their stolen luxury vehicle right to the edge of the cliff. The towering glass walls of Pinnacle headquarters hummed with the quiet, ruthless efficiency of a corporate war room. Wednesday morning, sunlight shattered against the panoramic windows of the 40th floor, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished slate tile. I sat at the absolute head of the massive obsidian conference table, projecting uncompromising authority. My bespoke charcoal suit felt like armor as I surveyed the 6 elite forensic accountants occupying the leather chairs lining the perimeter. These individuals represented the sharpest analytical minds in the financial sector, handpicked for their ability to dismantle complex corporate structures without leaving a single digital fingerprint. I did not waste time with formal greetings or corporate pleasantries. I slid a sleek titanium drive across the polished wood. "Access the Kensington and Reed mainframe," I instructed, my voice cutting through the ambient hum of the servers. "Bypass their standard perimeter firewalls and initiate a deep-level extraction of their primary billing ledgers. Leave absolutely no trace of our presence." My lead analyst caught the drive, plugging it seamlessly into the encrypted terminal at the center of the table. The massive projection screens dominating the far wall flickered to life. Lines of green code cascaded downward as my team unleashed our proprietary auditing algorithms against the law firm's outdated security infrastructure. The digital barriers guarding the prestigious firm shattered in under 4 minutes. The internal organs of Kensington and Reed spilled across the illuminated screens, exposing the suffocating financial rot sustaining their manufactured prestige. I directed the team to bypass the senior partner accounts and tunnel directly into the mid-level and junior associate databases. I needed to isolate the specific financial lifelines fueling Valerie's fabricated high society lifestyle and Montgomery's arrogant displays of wealth. "Isolate Montgomery Hayes," I commanded, watching his staff profile materialize on the center monitor. "Extract his client billing histories spanning the last 3 fiscal quarters. Cross-reference his reported billable hours against his actual secure building badge swipes and digital login timestamps." The accountants executed the directive, their fingers striking their mechanical keyboards in a synchronized, lethal rhythm. The data populated instantly, mapping a stark, undeniable matrix of predatory theft. Montgomery projected the image of a legal prodigy, flaunting custom-tailored Italian suits and leasing high-end European sports cars. The screens revealed exactly how he funded that illusion. He operated a massive, highly illegal shadow billing scheme. My analysts isolated the discrepancies with ruthless precision. Montgomery systematically targeted vulnerable corporate clients, mid-sized logistics firms, and struggling regional manufacturing companies who lacked the internal accounting resources to scrutinize complex, multi-page legal invoices. He deliberately padded his timesheets, inflating his hourly consultations by a staggering 40%. "Look at the routing structure," my lead accountant noted, highlighting a complex web of illicit wire transfers pulsing on the screen. Montgomery did not merely overcharge his clients, he actively embezzled the surplus capital. He siphoned the overcharged funds directly from the firm's primary escrow accounts, funneling the stolen liquidity through a series of ghost vendor invoices. He established 3 dummy corporations registered in Delaware, routing the clean funds into his personal offshore holdings. He utilized the stolen money to lease his luxury vehicles, purchase his designer wardrobes, and ultimately finance the massive diamond ring he used to secure my sister's blind loyalty. He was not a brilliant legal mind. He was a parasitic embezzler, actively bleeding his own clients to death to maintain his country club facade. I ordered my team to compile the wire transfer receipts, building an airtight federal indictment. Pivot the search parameters, I instructed, shifting my gaze to the secondary monitor. Pull the complete human resources dossier on Valerie, extract her onboarding documents, her academic submissions, and her initial case filings from the past 2 weeks. The screen wiped clean, replacing Montgomery's financial crimes with Valerie's employment portfolio. My sister spent her entire life hiding behind my parents' endless financial backing, convinced her golden child status exempted her from actual labor. I knew she possessed neither the work ethic nor the intellect to survive the brutal, unforgiving environment of top-tier corporate litigation. I needed concrete proof of her inevitable shortcuts. The algorithms tore through her background check. The discrepancies surfaced almost immediately. My team retrieved the digital academic transcripts she submitted to Kensington and Reed to secure her lucrative junior associate position. I initiated a direct, silent verification protocol with her university registrar's encrypted database. The documents did not match. Valerie had actively manipulated the digital file, artificially inflating her grade point average and forging a prestigious academic honors designation that she never earned. She committed blatant academic fraud to bypass the firm's rigorous hiring filters, lying her way into a position she completely lacked the competence to hold. But her deception extended far beyond her falsified resume. I ordered the analyst to run her first week of active legal filings through our proprietary plagiarism detection software. The system highlighted the text in glaring crimson blocks, illuminating her absolute desperation. Valerie, completely overwhelmed by the crushing workload and entirely incapable of drafting original legal arguments, had panicked. Instead of doing the grueling research required of a junior associate, she accessed the firm's archived database. She downloaded historical case files authored by senior partners, specifically targeting complex antitrust filings and corporate merger blueprints. She copy-pasted massive sections of intricate legal strategy directly into her own assignments. She merely swapped the client names in the document headers, altered the dates, and submitted the stolen work as her own original legal strategy. She committed severe malpractice just to survive her first 5 days on the payroll. She jeopardized the legal standing of multi-million-dollar corporate mergers simply because she refused to admit her own staggering incompetence. Every achievement my parents celebrated, every milestone they used to justify my mistreatment, was a hollow, fabricated lie. Valerie built her entire identity on a foundation of stolen words and forged credentials. I stood up from my leather chair, walking slowly toward the towering projection screens. I examined the raw data mapping the destruction of my family's manufactured dynasty. On the left monitor, Montgomery's shadow billing network pulsed in bright red vectors, providing undeniable evidence of his status as a relentless embezzler. On the right monitor, Valerie's forged transcripts and plagiarized legal filings glowed in unforgiving high definition, exposing her as a desperate, talentless fraud. They believed they were untouchable. They believed they held the power to publicly humiliate me at country club galas, to steal my identity for luxury auto loans, and to threaten my existence. They assumed their titles shielded them from consequence. I gathered the printed dossiers compiling their respective crimes, securing the heavy parchment inside a set of black leather folders. Sylvia Kensington prided herself on operating an institution of absolute legal integrity. She hired Pinnacle Restructuring Group to identify external liabilities and trim financial fat. She possessed no idea that the rot festered directly inside her own junior associate pool. I watched the damning data populate across the massive projection screens, realizing Sylvia Kensington was unknowingly harboring 2 federal criminals in her ranks. The heavy knocking against the flimsy wooden door of my decoy studio apartment was aggressive and entirely unannounced. Thursday evening rain battered the single, grime-streaked window of the cramped living space. I maintained this specific apartment on the frayed, industrial edge of the city exclusively to anchor my fabricated identity: the peeling linoleum floors, the water-stained acoustic ceiling tiles, and the flickering fluorescent bulb in the kitchenette perfectly corroborated the narrative of a ruined, impoverished dropout. I spent the afternoon transitioning from the pristine, climate-controlled environment of Pinnacle headquarters back into my thrifted, oversized sweater and scuffed canvas sneakers, anticipating their inevitable escalation. The knocking intensified, the cheap hollow-core door rattling furiously against its rusted hinges. I unlatched the chain and turned the deadbolt. I opened the door to find Gregory, Brenda, Valerie, and Montgomery crowding the narrow, peeling hallway. They had ambushed me at my fake residence to apply maximum psychological pressure. The visual contrast was jarring. They stood bathed in the sickly yellow hallway light, wearing clothing that cost more than a year's rent in this building. Gregory wore a tailored cashmere overcoat, his face flushed with manufactured outrage. Brenda clutched a heavy, imported leather handbag tightly against her chest, her eyes darting across the cracked plaster walls as if the surrounding poverty might physically infect her. Valerie wore a designer trench coat, her new diamond engagement ring catching the dim light, her expression twisted into a permanent, aristocratic sneer. Montgomery led the charge. He bypassed the threshold without waiting for an invitation. He leaned against the doorframe, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, smirking at the sparse, cheap furniture I used as a prop. "Is this a joke?" Montgomery asked, his voice dripping with unvarnished contempt. He stepped fully into the room, his expensive leather Oxfords tracking rainwater onto my faded entry rug. He surveyed the battered futon, the scarred particle board coffee table, and the single, chipped ceramic mug resting by the sink. "You actually live in this squalor." The rest of the family funneled into the cramped apartment, instantly suffocating the limited square footage. Brenda refused to step past the entryway, pressing her back against the door, her nose wrinkling at the faint smell of boiled cabbage drifting through the building's ventilation shafts. Gregory did not waste time examining the architecture. He marched directly toward me, reaching inside his heavy overcoat. He pulled out a thick stack of legal transfer documents clamped firmly to a metal clipboard. He closed the physical distance, aggressively shoving the stack of transfer papers into my chest. The cold metal clip bit sharply into my collarbone. "Sign the title transfer," Gregory commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute, unearned authority. "Right now, we need the keys to the sedan parked outside." I did not reach up to grasp the clipboard. I simply let gravity dictate the outcome. The heavy stack of papers slid down the front of my sweater and hit the peeling linoleum floor with a loud, flat smack. When I calmly let the papers fall to the linoleum floor, Gregory's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. "What is the exact purpose of this transaction?" I asked, keeping my vocal cords entirely relaxed, projecting a terrifying stillness. Valerie stepped out from behind her fiancé, pointing a manicured finger at the discarded documents. "We require immediate liquid capital. The downtown botanical gardens require a massive catering deposit by tomorrow morning for the engagement gala. Our primary accounts are currently locked due to a temporary routing error." It was a staggering, pathetic lie. Their accounts were not experiencing a routing error. Their accounts were completely drained, exhausted by the crushing weight of their leveraged consumer debt and the fraudulent auto loan they had illegally signed on Monday. They desperately needed an immediate infusion of cash to maintain their fabricated aristocratic illusion. They intended to leverage the title of my rusted, 10-year-old decoy sedan to secure a high-interest, predatory bridge loan from a shadow lender. They were willing to trap me in a 400% interest rate loan just to purchase imported floral arrangements for a single party. Montgomery laughed. The sound was harsh, grating, and entirely devoid of humor. He stepped forward, kicking the clipboard casually across the floor with the toe of his polished shoe. He looked down at me, mocking my pathetic existence. "Look at you," Montgomery sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "You dwell in a concrete box. You drive a worthless, decaying machine. You possess absolutely zero leverage in this world. Your parents requested a minor financial accommodation, and you are standing here throwing a silent tantrum like a petulant child. That machine constitutes my sole mode of transportation," I stated softly, testing the limits of his monumental arrogance. "Nobody cares about your commute to whatever minimum wage nightmare you occupy," Montgomery snapped, his ego inflating to maximum capacity. He stepped closer, attempting to project the intimidating, overpowering aura of a senior corporate litigator. He failed completely. He smelled of expensive scotch and profound insecurity. I am going to make this incredibly simple for you. Liliana, pick up the pen. Sign the vehicle transfer. If you refuse to comply with your parents' financial demands, I will bury you. He leaned down, bringing his face mere inches from mine. I am a partner at Kensington and Reed. I control resources and legal mechanisms you cannot even begin to fathom. He threatened to bury me in frivolous familial negligence lawsuits if I did not comply with my parents' financial demands. I remained perfectly still. I did not flinch or step backward. I did not inform him that familial negligence was a completely fabricated, legally unenforceable concept designed exclusively to terrify uneducated, vulnerable targets. He was utilizing the exact same predatory intimidation tactics he deployed to extort his mid-sized corporate clients. He viewed me as a helpless mark, an easy target he could crush to impress his new fiancée. I will file a barrage of civil actions against you before my morning coffee, Montgomery continued, intoxicated by his own perceived supremacy. I will claim you maliciously abandoned your financial obligations to your elderly parents. I will subpoena your pathetic bank records. I will legally freeze your barista savings. And I will ruthlessly garnish whatever meager paycheck you scrape together. You will spend the next 10 years of your miserable life drowning in my legal fees. Valerie smiled, a vicious, triumphant expression spreading across her face. She leaned against Montgomery's shoulder, basking in the glow of his fabricated power. You should listen to him, Liliana. You do not mess with elite lawyers. We will take everything you have. Brenda finally spoke from the doorway, her voice dripping with maternal disdain. Just sign the paper. Liliana, stop being so incredibly selfish. Valerie deserves a perfect engagement party. You owe us this for dropping out and humiliating the family name. They truly believed they commanded the room. They assumed the grimy walls, the flickering light bulb, and my thrifted sweater defined the absolute boundaries of my power. They had no idea they were standing in a theatrical set, delivering monologues to the architect of their impending destruction. Montgomery boasted about weaponizing Kensington and Reed against me, completely oblivious to the undeniable fact that I possessed the unchallengeable corporate mandate to terminate his employment, seize his assets, and hand his forged billing ledgers directly to federal prosecutors. I absorbed their abuse in total silence. I let the threats hang in the damp, stagnant air of the decoy's apartment. I watched the vein pulse in Gregory's neck. I watched Brenda clutch her imported leather bag. I watched Valerie revel in her hollow superiority. I looked at Montgomery's smug, punchable face, silently memorizing every arrogant syllable he uttered for the day of his upcoming execution. I walked back to my secure terminal the absolute second their brake lights disappeared down the gritty street. I did not linger in the damp, drafty entryway of the decoy studio apartment. The peeling linoleum floor and the flickering fluorescent bulb above cast long, sickly shadows across the narrow room, but I possessed no intention of remaining in the squalor they had just mocked. I knelt beside the scarred particle board coffee table, pressing my thumb against a concealed biometric sensor hidden seamlessly beneath the rusted baseboard heater. A reinforced steel panel slid open with a muted mechanical hum. I extracted a sleek, military-grade encrypted laptop, resting the cold metal chassis against the battered table. I lifted the lid, and the screen flared to life, casting a pale, icy blue glow over the decaying floral wallpaper. The echoing threats Montgomery had just issued vibrated in my memory. He strutted through my doorway, utilizing his bespoke Italian suit and his junior partner title to project manufactured dominance. He promised to garnish my wages. He threatened to freeze my accounts. He vowed to bury me in frivolous familial negligence lawsuits, fully intending to exploit the legal system he swore to uphold, all to extract capital for a floral deposit. Valerie had leaned against his shoulder, her diamond engagement ring catching the dim light, reveling in the psychological terror they attempted to inflict upon me. They assumed I was a helpless, cornered animal. They believed the hollow core door and the cheap furniture defined the absolute limits of my power. I decided it was time to compress the spring to its maximum limit. I opened a direct, encrypted communication channel to Sylvia Kensington. I typed my executive access credentials, bypassing the standard administrative gateways of her prestigious law firm, and routed a priority, Level 1 transmission directly to her private server. I did not request a consultation. I did not ask for an audience. I dictated terms. Sylvia, I typed, my fingers striking the mechanical keys with lethal, rhythmic precision. The preliminary digital forensic audit is complete. The structural liabilities embedded within your firm are significantly more severe than initially projected. I watched the encrypted connection monitor. I waited barely 30 seconds before the typing indicator pulsed. Sylvia Kensington was online. Her law firm was actively hemorrhaging capital, facing an impending margin call on their commercial real estate leases. She was drowning in toxic debt generated by the exact parasites I was currently hunting. I am reviewing your message now, Sylvia replied, her digital response betraying a frantic, barely concealed urgency. Do we need to implement the phased departmental layoffs? I can have human resources draft the severance packages by tomorrow. We are bypassing the phased approach entirely. I answered, locking my jaw. The rot requires immediate surgical amputation. I mandated a full, mandatory executive restructuring meeting for the following Tuesday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I deliberately selected Tuesday. I needed to grant them the weekend to host their lavish, fraudulent engagement party at the downtown Botanical Gardens. I wanted them to spend stolen money, drink imported champagne, and inflate their egos to the absolute bursting point. I needed their fabricated aristocratic illusion to reach maximum altitude before I severed the engines. The higher they climbed, the more devastating the impact would become. I require the immediate presence of your senior partners in the primary executive boardroom, I instructed, mapping out the precise architecture of the execution. However, the financial hemorrhage extends deeply into your lower tiers. I mandate the attendance of all junior associates and all mid-level partners. I could not leave any variables to chance. I needed to ensure the targets could not escape the blast radius. I specifically require the attendance of Valerie Caldwell, I typed, embedding her name into the unalterable corporate mandate. Furthermore, ensure Montgomery Hayes is seated at that table. Their specific case files and billing ledgers feature prominently in the impending restructuring protocol. Sylvia did not question the bizarre specificity of the request. She did not know Valerie was my sister. She did not know Montgomery was the arrogant parasite who had just stood in my apartment threatening to destroy my life. She only knew that Pinnacle Restructuring Group held the sole lifeline capable of pulling her legacy out of bankruptcy. Sylvia, desperate to resolve her firm's liquidity crisis, agreed without a single moment of hesitation. The executive boardroom is yours, Sylvia confirmed, the text flashing across my screen. I will clear the floor and issue the internal summons immediately. I leaned back on the battered futon, the springs creaking beneath my weight, and visualized the primary boardroom at Kensington and Reed. It occupied the absolute center of the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls enclosed the space, rendering it entirely transparent to the surrounding legal teams. It was soundproofed, sterile, and highly visible. I wanted the arrogant thieves trapped inside a glass box when the guillotine finally fell. I wanted every elite lawyer, paralegal, and senior partner in the building to witness their total, inescapable ruin. I accessed the firm's internal exchange server using my backdoor authorization, monitoring the outbound traffic from Sylvia's executive office. I watched the digital calendar invites deploy across the network, landing in the inboxes of these specified targets. I isolated Montgomery's email client. The read receipt triggered almost instantly. I watched his digital footprint as he forwarded the mandatory meeting invite directly to Valerie's internal address. I intercepted the attached message he typed to his new fiancée. Sylvia is calling an all-hands executive meeting for Tuesday, Montgomery wrote, his boundless arrogance bleeding through the screen. She is likely announcing the year-end partner promotions early. Wear the new tailored suit we bought. We need to project total dominance. I stared at the intercepted text, a cold, predatory calm settling over my chest. Montgomery truly believed his heavily padded timesheets and stolen client funds had secured his ascent to the senior partnership. Valerie genuinely assumed her plagiarized legal filings and forged academic transcripts had elevated her to the legal elite. They were willingly marching toward the slaughterhouse, absolutely convinced they were arriving to collect a crown. I verified the delivery receipts. Both targets had clicked the acceptance icon, legally binding themselves to attend. I opened the heavy forensic dossiers stored on my encrypted drive. I reviewed the undeniable proof of Montgomery's shadow billing network, the illicit wire transfers, and the offshore shell corporations he used to hide the embezzled capital. I reviewed the forged auto loan documents tying them to federal identity theft. I reviewed the plagiarized case files Valerie had submitted to Sylvia just 3 days ago. I compiled the raw data into a streamlined, irrefutable presentation. I organized the digital slides, ensuring the financial anomalies would project in blinding, high-definition crimson across the massive screens of the glass boardroom. I engineered the sequence of their destruction meticulously. First, the exposure of the stolen client funds. Second, the revelation of the academic fraud. Third, the termination of their careers. Fourth, the activation of the federal authorities. I disconnected my laptop from the server, the screen going black, plunging the peeling studio apartment back into shadows. The trap was perfectly set, the coordinates locked, and the target secured. I sent the formal corporate calendar invites, securing their mandatory attendance for a public slaughter they could not possibly anticipate. The upscale downtown bistro reeked of expensive imported truffles and predatory, high-interest credit. Saturday evening wrapped the city in a biting chill, but inside the exclusive venue, the temperature hovered at a stifling, manufactured warmth. My parents had rented the entire private atrium to host Valerie and Montgomery's engagement gala. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the illuminated botanical gardens. Waitstaff circulated in flawless synchronization, carrying silver platters laden with beluga caviar and towering flutes of vintage champagne. Gregory and Brenda stood near the entrance, operating as the aristocratic architects of the evening. Gregory wore a brand new, tailored tuxedo, aggressively shaking hands with the arriving legal elite. Brenda draped herself in a heavy silk gown, her neck adorned with a fresh strand of pearls. They poured capital into the open bar and the exotic floral arrangements cascading from the vaulted ceiling. They funded this opulent display entirely through the stolen credit lines they assumed I was liable for. They believed they had successfully weaponized my clean financial history, draining the fraudulent accounts to purchase the respect of the corporate litigators filling the room. I attended quietly, blending into the shadows of the room. I wore a simple, beige cotton blouse and a pair of dark, clearance rack trousers. The muted garments functioned as perfect urban camouflage among the sea of bespoke Italian tailoring and vibrant designer dresses. I claimed a narrow space beside a towering marble pillar near the coat check, holding a small glass of tap water. I did not mingle. I did not sample the expensive hors d'oeuvres. I stood perfectly still, observing the parasites gorge themselves on their stolen feast. Across the atrium, Montgomery anchored the private mahogany bar. He leaned heavily against the polished wood, holding a crystal tumbler of 20-year-old single malt scotch. He held court with a cluster of mid-level partners from Kensington and Reed. He slapped their shoulders, tossing his head back in raucous laughter, projecting the dominant aura of a senior executive in waiting. He utilized the stolen capital from his shadow billing network to lease the luxury watch glinting on his wrist. He purchased their camaraderie with embezzled funds, entirely oblivious to the reality that my forensic accountants had already mapped every single illicit wire transfer he executed. Valerie navigated the center of the room, a beacon of fabricated prestige. She wore a stunning, floor-length crimson gown that swept across the hardwood floor. The 3-carat cushion-cut diamond weighed heavily on her left hand, catching the glare of the recessed lighting. She floated between groups of junior associates, gesturing expansively, accepting their fawning compliments with practiced, aristocratic grace. She believed she occupied the absolute pinnacle of society. She assumed her plagiarized case files and forged academic transcripts had secured her an untouchable throne. I watched her eyes scan the perimeter. She swept her gaze over the floral displays, the champagne pyramid, and the jazz trio playing softly in the corner. Then she spotted me. The manufactured warmth vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a sharp, predatory calculation. Valerie did not view my quiet presence as a familial obligation. She viewed my thrifted clothing and my silent demeanor as a prop she could utilize to further elevate her own status. She wanted to demonstrate her absolute superiority in front of her new colleagues. She turned to a cluster of impeccably dressed Kensington and Reed associates. She whispered a quick, venomous remark, pointing discreetly toward my shadowed pillar. The associates chuckled. Their curiosity piqued. Valerie led the charge, navigating the crowded floor with deliberate, aggressive strides. The sycophantic lawyers trailed close behind her, eager to witness the spectacle. She held a full, oversized goblet of dark red wine in her right hand. She did not break eye contact as she closed the physical distance. I remained planted against the cold marble. I did not shrink back into the shadows. I watched her approach, calculating the exact trajectory of her malice. Valerie feigned a sudden loss of balance. She stepped sharply to her left, thrusting her shoulder directly into my collarbone. The physical impact forced me a half-step backward against the pillar. She simultaneously tilted her wrist, overturning the massive crystal goblet. The dark red liquid cascaded violently downward. It saturated the front of my beige cotton blouse, soaking through the thin fabric instantly. The cold wine clung to my skin, pooling at my waistline and dripping heavily onto the polished hardwood floor. The shattered remnants of the glass rolled away, coming to a halt near my scuffed canvas shoes. The jazz music continued to play, but the immediate vicinity fell into a sudden, tense silence. The trailing associates gasped, covering their mouths in synchronized, theatrical shock. Valerie, emboldened by her perceived untouchability, deliberately bumped into me, spilling a full glass of red wine down the front of my only clean blouse. She took a dramatic step back, pressing her empty hand against her chest. "Oh, Liliana," Valerie gasped, her voice dripping with artificial horror. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not even see you lurking in the shadows like a stray animal." The fake apology lasted barely 3 seconds before the cruelty bled completely through the facade. She turned her head slightly, ensuring her law firm colleagues possessed a front-row seat to the execution. She laughed loudly with her law firm colleagues, loudly mocking my tragic, impoverished life, while Montgomery sneered from the private bar. "Look at this disaster," Valerie announced, her voice rising to carry over the ambient noise of the bistro. She gestured toward the massive crimson stain spreading across my chest. "It is truly a shame. That was likely the only clean, semi-presentable garment you owned. Now you have absolutely nothing to wear to your minimum wage shifts." The associates joined in her laughter, a chorus of sharp, elitist mockery echoing off the glass walls. They analyzed my stained, cheap clothing and my silent posture, entirely validating Valerie's fabricated narrative. To them, I represented the ultimate failure, a destitute, uneducated burden dragging down their brilliant, rising star of a colleague. Across the room, Montgomery raised his tumbler of scotch. He caught my eye through the crowd, smirking victoriously from the mahogany bar. He believed his Thursday night threats had successfully broken my spirit. He assumed my silence equaled total, crushing submission. I did not raise my voice or wipe the stain immediately. I let the cold wine drip from my hem onto the floorboards. I did not cross my arms to hide the spreading crimson blotch. I did not break eye contact with my sister. I absorbed the public humiliation with the terrifying, unyielding patience of a corporate executioner. Valerie's laughter slowly tapered off. She expected tears. She anticipated a frantic, embarrassed retreat, or a screaming, hysterical outburst she could use to further assassinate my character. She needed a reaction to feed her colossal ego. I gave her absolutely nothing but the void. I simply offered a cold, unsettling smile and walked out early. The corners of my mouth curled upward in a dead, clinical expression. I looked at the 3-carat diamond on her finger. I looked at the custom crimson gown. I looked at the sycophantic lawyers laughing at her side. I saw the massive, crushing $80 million debt anchor tied directly to their ankles. The smile communicated a profound, lethal knowledge that Valerie's fragile brain fundamentally failed to process. A microscopic fracture appeared in her arrogant mask. Her jaw tightened. She took a tiny, involuntary half-step backward, suddenly unnerved by the absolute gravity of my silence. I turned my back on the group. I did not rush. I walked with slow, deliberate, echoing strides toward the bistro exit. I forced the murmuring guests to step aside, carving a path through the opulent room in my ruined, wine-soaked blouse. Gregory and Brenda actively turned their heads away, pretending I did not exist, terrified that acknowledging my stained departure would tarnish their aristocratic illusion. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the biting Saturday night wind. The cold air hit the damp fabric of my blouse, but I felt completely unbothered. The public mockery, the stolen credit, the ruined clothing, it all amounted to meaningless, temporary noise. I left them clinking their crystal glasses in the warm bistro, fully aware that the financial timer I had set was rapidly ticking down to 0. Monday morning brought the ultimate, desperate escalation of their coordinated domestic terror. I stepped off the transit bus, pulling the thin collar of my thrifted coat against the biting, horizontal rain. I returned to the industrial district specifically to retrieve a final batch of decoy mail, ensuring my fabricated identity remained entirely airtight before the massive corporate execution scheduled for the following day. The storm battered the cracked pavement, flooding the gutters with dark, freezing water. I rounded the corner of the crumbling brick building, my scuffed canvas shoes splashing through the puddles, and stopped at the edge of the property line. I arrived at my decoy apartment to find my modest belongings haphazardly thrown onto the wet concrete sidewalk. The property manager had hauled my entire fabricated existence out of the peeling studio and dumped it directly into the gutter. The scarred particle board coffee table sat splintered against a rusted fire hydrant. The battered futon absorbed the relentless downpour, the cheap gray fabric darkening as it soaked up the freezing rain. My threadbare sweaters, faded denim jeans, and chipped ceramic dishes lay scattered across the cement, completely ruined by the brutal weather. The cheap props I utilized to construct the illusion of a destitute dropout now formed a pathetic, soggy mountain of debris on the public curb. I recognized the ruthless, illegal mechanics of the maneuver instantly. My parents, utilizing a corrupt property manager Montgomery kept on retainer, attempted an illegal, rapid eviction to force me back into their home under their absolute control. Montgomery routinely weaponized his junior partner status at Kensington and Reed to execute aggressive, off-the-books lockouts for his sleazy commercial clients. He bypassed the mandatory 30-day civil eviction notices. He ignored municipal housing laws. He simply deployed a localized bribe, compensating the slumlord in cash to physically purge my belongings while he drafted forged abandonment notices on stolen law firm letterhead. He added yet another severe layer of liability to his impending federal indictment, foolishly handing my forensic accountants a documented case of criminal conspiracy and illegal property seizure. Gregory and Brenda stood on the curb, anchored beneath a massive, golf-sized umbrella. They positioned themselves upwind, actively shielding their expensive cashmere coats from the violent storm, while they watched the rain destroy my decoy furniture. They waited like predatory vultures, expecting to witness my absolute psychological collapse. Brenda stood on the curb, arms crossed, demanding my total submission. She stepped out from beneath the canopy of the umbrella, allowing the rain to hit her face just to ensure I caught the full, unvarnished magnitude of her triumphant sneer. She looked at the ruined futon, then locked her eyes onto mine, radiating pure, manufactured supremacy. "The game is officially over, Liliana," Brenda announced, her voice cutting sharply through the sound of the pouring rain. "Montgomery finalized the eviction paperwork this morning. The locks are changed. You possess absolutely zero legal rights to cross that threshold. You have no home, you have no credit, you are standing in the street with absolutely nothing." I did not flinch. I let the freezing rain mat my hair against my forehead, maintaining an impenetrable, terrifying stillness. Gregory brandished a laminated sheet of paper, tapping the document aggressively with his index finger. "If you attempt to touch the doorknob, I will personally contact the municipal police," he threatened, his chest puffing outward. "I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. We possess the legal authority to bury you under the jail. Liliana, Montgomery guaranteed it." They truly believed they had successfully cornered a helpless animal. They orchestrated the illegal lockout to strip away my physical shelter, assuming the sheer terror of sudden homelessness would shatter my resistance. They needed me broken. They needed me desperate enough to surrender my remaining capital. "You brought this disaster entirely upon yourself," Brenda continued, lecturing me over the roar of the storm. "You embarrassed your sister at the country club. You refused to support her engagement. Now, you face the consequences of your monumental selfishness. But your father and I are willing to offer you a final lifeline." She dictated her terms with the arrogant confidence of a conquering monarch. She commanded me to transfer the $40,000 from my decoy savings account directly to the Botanical Gardens caterer by noon. If I complied, if I handed over every single cent I supposedly possessed, she promised to allow me to sleep on an air mattress in their unfinished basement. She outlined a future where I existed solely as an indentured servant, forced to provide free manual labor for Valerie's upcoming wedding while remaining entirely trapped under their financial jurisdiction. They expected tears. They expected me to fall to my knees on the wet concrete, weeping uncontrollably as the reality of my destitution crushed my spirit. They anticipated a frantic, hysterical apology, begging for their toxic salvation. I did not scream or beg for my apartment back. I completely ignored Brenda's shrieking monologue. I stepped past Gregory, entirely disregarding his blustering threats and the forged legal notice trembling in his hand. I walked directly into the center of the debris field. The freezing water soaked through my thin canvas shoes. But I did not break my deliberate, measured stride. I knelt beside a scattered pile of thrifted clothing resting near the warped particle board table. I calmly packed a single, weathered duffel bag with a few items, leaving the rest of the cheap decoy furniture rotting in the street. I retrieved a spare phone charger, a faded wool scarf, and a physical copy of a decoy utility bill I needed for my corporate records. I folded the damp scarf with meticulous precision, pressing it into the bottom of the canvas bag. I zipped the heavy brass closure shut. The sharp metallic rasp of the zipper severed Brenda's ongoing lecture. Her triumphant smile cracked, fracturing into profound confusion. She watched me stand up, heft the weathered bag over my shoulder, and turn my back on the ruined apartment. "What are you doing?" Brenda demanded, her voice losing its manufactured aristocratic cadence, pitching upward into raw, unadulterated panic. "You cannot just walk away. You have no money. You have nowhere to sleep." Wow. I did not offer her a single syllable of explanation. I did not engage with their frantic, collapsing narrative. I stepped off the flooded curb and raised my hand into the driving rain. A passing yellow taxi slammed on its brakes, the tires skidding slightly against the slick asphalt. The heavy vehicle pulled to a halt, sending a massive wave of dirty street water splashing directly onto Gregory's expensive leather Oxfords. He jumped backward, cursing loudly, furiously wiping the filthy grime from his tailored trousers. I opened the rear door of the cab. I hailed a taxi right in front of their triumphant faces and retreated to my actual penthouse to prepare for war. I slid into the dry, heated interior of the vehicle, slamming the heavy door shut. I looked through the rain-streaked window as the taxi accelerated away from the curb. Brenda and Gregory stood paralyzed in the freezing storm, clutching their golf umbrella, completely bewildered by my total lack of submission. They stared at the rotting furniture, realizing their ultimate psychological weapon had inflicted absolutely zero damage. I instructed the driver to bypass the industrial district and head directly toward the soaring glass canyons of the financial sector. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket, removing the battery and tossing the cheap plastic components into the vehicle's trash receptacle. The decoy identity was officially terminated. The miserable, invisible dropout they exploited for a decade died on that wet concrete sidewalk. The taxi descended into the highly secured underground garage of my minimalist high-rise. I paid the driver in cash, grabbed the weathered canvas bag, and dropped it straight into a commercial dumpster near the elevator bank. I bypassed the biometric scanners, stepping into the pristine, polished steel cabin of my private lift. I rode the private elevator up to the 40th floor, shedding the final remnants of the invisible scapegoat as I prepared to don the armor of the apex predator. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master closet, fastening the final button of my bespoke charcoal power suit. The fabric felt like physical armor, woven from heavy Italian wool and tailored specifically to Project Absolute, unyielding authority. Tuesday morning sunlight poured through the panoramic windows of my penthouse, casting long, sharp beams across the dark slate flooring. The miserable, drenched woman who had stood on the crumbling curb 24 hours ago no longer existed. I discarded that fabricated shell inside a commercial dumpster the previous afternoon. Today, I dressed for war. I adjusted the crisp collar of my starch-white silk blouse and slipped my feet into sharp, polished leather pumps. The physical transformation mirrored the lethal pivot in my corporate strategy. The invisible, impoverished scapegoat vanished, replaced entirely by the apex predator. I walked to the granite vanity and picked up the heavy black leather forensic portfolio. The metal lock clicked securely into place, sealing the undeniable documentation of Valerie's academic fraud and Montgomery's massive embezzlement scheme. I gripped the thick handle, feeling the immense weight of the federal evidence I was about to unleash. I secured my heavy black leather forensic portfolio and descended into the city. I exited the fortified penthouse and navigated to the subterranean garage. My private driver waited beside a heavily armored, midnight black sport utility vehicle. He opened the rear door without speaking. I slid into the climate-controlled cabin, placing the portfolio onto the leather seat beside me. The vehicle climbed the concrete ramp and merged seamlessly into the dense, aggressive current of downtown Chicago traffic. We navigated the towering glass canyons of the financial district. The skyline blurred past the tinted windows. I reviewed the execution sequence in my mind, finalizing the tactical maneuvers required to dismantle my sister's manufactured dynasty. Kensington and Reed occupied the top 15 floors of a massive, 50-story monolithic high-rise. Their name anchored the steel marquee above the main entrance, projecting a towering illusion of legacy and prestige. I knew the truth. I knew they were suffocating under hundreds of millions of dollars in toxic commercial real estate debt, bleeding capital at an entirely unsustainable rate. The armored vehicle pulled to a smooth stop at the curb. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement. I bypassed the revolving doors, pushing through the heavy glass side entrance. I arrived at the towering glass skyscraper of Kensington and Reed. The grand lobby of the skyscraper reeked of manufactured elitism. Veined white marble stretched across the vast expanse, reflecting the glow of modern, geometric chandeliers. I marched directly toward the primary reception desk. My heavy heels struck the polished stone, producing a sharp, rhythmic cadence that commanded immediate attention. The receptionist, an older man in a tailored uniform, looked up from his dual monitors. He took one look at my bespoke charcoal suit, the heavy leather portfolio, and the uncompromising posture I carried, and instantly categorized me, the lobby receptionist, assuming I was a high-net-worth client, immediately escorted me up to the grand executive boardroom. He did not ask for my identification. He did not demand an appointment confirmation. He assumed I was a Fortune 500 chief executive officer arriving to negotiate a multi-million-dollar merger. "Good morning, madam," he greeted, his tone laced with deferential respect. "May I direct you to the executive tier?" "The primary boardroom," I replied, my voice a flat, commanding murmur. "Sylvia Kensington is expecting my arrival." The receptionist nodded rapidly, abandoning his station to personally guide me across the vast lobby. He swiped his master keycard over the biometric reader, securing the private elevator bank. The brushed steel doors parted immediately. He gestured for me to enter, stepping back and bowing his head slightly. The doors glided shut, sealing me inside the ascending cabin. The elevator climbed rapidly, the floor numbers ticking upward on the digital display. I visualized Montgomery and Valerie preparing for this exact meeting. I intercepted their internal communications on Sunday evening. Montgomery instructed Valerie to wear her most expensive tailored suit, assuming Sylvia Kensington planned to announce early partner promotions. They were currently preening, polishing their fabricated personas, entirely convinced they were about to ascend the corporate hierarchy. They expected champagne, they expected applause, they expected to solidify their aristocratic supremacy. The elevator chimed softly. The doors opened directly onto the executive floor. The atmosphere shifted from bustling corporate activity to hushed, suffocating reverence. Frosted glass partitions lined the hallway, guarding the mahogany offices of the senior partners. I did not pause to examine the expensive artwork hung along the corridor. I walked straight toward the massive, empty glass enclosure dominating the center of the floor space. The executive boardroom functioned as a staggering display of over-leveraged wealth. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls rendered the space completely transparent to the surrounding cubicles and junior associate desks. A massive table carved from a single slab of petrified wood anchored the room. 30 high-backed leather chairs lined the perimeter. 3 massive projection screens hung suspended from the ceiling, currently blank and waiting. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, stepping over the threshold. The ambient noise of the outer office vanished instantly, neutralized by the acoustic dampening panels embedded in the ceiling. I walked the length of the petrified wood table. I bypassed the side chairs, moving deliberately toward the absolute head of the room. I walked into the massive empty glass enclosure and took my seat directly in the high-backed leather chair at the absolute head of the petrified wood table. I placed the heavy black leather forensic portfolio squarely on the polished surface. I unclasped the metal lock, letting the sharp snap echo in the quiet, sterile enclosure. I extracted the digital interface drive, plugging the titanium cylinder into the concealed port embedded in the table. The 3 projection screens overhead flared to life simultaneously, displaying the stark, silver logo of Pinnacle Restructuring Group against a black background. I did not pull out a notepad. I did not arrange any pens. I folded my hands calmly over the black portfolio, letting the silence of the room ground me as the law firm's staff began to slowly file through the heavy mahogany doors. The digital clock on the wall shifted closer to 9 o'clock. Through the transparent glass walls, I observed the firm's staff emerging from their respective offices. Paralegals, junior associates, and mid-level partners navigated the corridor. They carried expensive leather binders and thermal coffee mugs, murmuring to one another in hushed, nervous tones. An emergency. All-hands executive meeting called on a Tuesday morning universally signaled a catastrophic internal crisis. The anxiety radiating from the corridor was palpable. The lawyers entered the glass enclosure, their conversations dying instantly as they registered my presence at the head of the table. They did not recognize me. They saw a stranger wearing an aggressive power suit, commanding the primary seat usually reserved for Sylvia Kensington, backed by the imposing logo of a ruthless restructuring firm. They scrambled to find seats, instinctively avoiding the chairs immediately adjacent to my position. They recognized the lethal power dynamic anchoring the room. I did not greet them. I did not offer a polite nod. I maintained an impenetrable, terrifying stillness, projecting the aura of a silent executioner. I monitored the doorway as the lower-ranking staff filled the back rows, filling the room with the suffocating scent of expensive cologne and profound panic. I scanned the faces, registering the sheer terror masking their manufactured elitism. I kept my eyes locked on the entrance, waiting patiently for the arrogant thieves to walk blindly into their own execution chamber. Valerie and Montgomery strolled through the mahogany doors, their loud, arrogant laughter echoing off the glass walls. They crossed the threshold, projecting the entitlement of conquering monarchs returning to claim a surrendered territory. Montgomery wore a bespoke pinstripe suit tailored to mask his mediocre stature, his left wrist bearing the heavy luxury watch he leased, using embezzled client funds. He placed his palm firmly against the small of Valerie's back, guiding her into the enclosure as if he possessed the absolute deed to the building. Valerie draped a heavy cashmere coat over her arm, positioning her hand to ensure the 3-carat cushion-cut diamond glinted aggressively under the recessed ceiling lights. They remained entirely oblivious to the suffocating tension paralyzing the other 30 attorneys gathered in the room. The surrounding legal staff clutched leather binders, their postures rigid with the terrifying knowledge that an emergency Tuesday morning summons signaled a catastrophic internal crisis. Valerie and Montgomery possessed no such awareness. They assumed Sylvia Kensington summoned the staff to announce premature partnership elevations. They expected champagne. They expected applause. They expected to cement their aristocratic supremacy. Valerie stopped dead in her tracks the moment her eyes registered my presence at the head of the table. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of her leather portfolio, the knuckles bleaching stark white against the dark material. The manufactured, high society smile melted off her face, instantly replaced by visceral, burning indignation. She blinked twice, her brain violently rejecting the visual data presented before her. She saw the sister she had evicted from a rotting studio apartment just 24 hours prior. She saw the scapegoat she had mocked at the country club gala. Except the invisible failure now occupied the throne of her prestigious firm, wearing a bespoke charcoal power suit and exuding terrifying, unyielding gravity. Valerie lacked the intellectual restraint required to assess the shifting power dynamic. Her colossal ego immediately categorized my presence as a psychotic, desperate intrusion, her smug facade twisted into furious indignation. She shoved past a paralyzed paralegal, her stiletto heels striking the polished floorboards with a rhythmic, aggressive fury. Montgomery trailed a half-step behind her, his smirk morphing into a scowl of profound annoyance. Valerie reached the head of the table. She raised her leather-bound notebook and slammed it violently against the petrified wood surface. The sharp, explosive crack severed the hushed conversations of the surrounding legal teams. The sound echoed off the transparent glass walls, causing several junior associates in the back rows to physically flinch. "How did you bypass the lobby security?" Valerie hissed, keeping her voice pitched into a venomous whisper, desperately attempting to contain the spectacle. "Did you follow me here? Are you actually insane?" I did not blink. I did not shift my posture in the high-backed leather chair. I kept my hands folded calmly over my black forensic portfolio, letting the silence magnify her unhinged behavior. I did not point out the massive projection screen suspended above my head, currently displaying the brushed steel logo of Pinnacle Restructuring Group. Valerie's blinding arrogance prevented her from reading the digital writing on the wall. Montgomery leaned over the table, pressing his palms against the polished wood, attempting to project physical intimidation. "I warned you about trespassing, Liliana," he growled, the scent of expensive cologne wafting off his collar. "I told you yesterday morning. You have exactly 10 seconds to vacate this chair and exit this building before I have the municipal police drag you out in handcuffs." I let his empty threat hang in the sterile air of the boardroom. I watched a drop of nervous sweat begin to form at his hairline as he realized his physical intimidation yielded absolutely zero results. I remained a solid, immovable wall of charcoal wool. Valerie sneered, emboldened by her fiancé's posturing. She assumed my silence equated to paralyzing fear. "You are completely unhinged," Valerie spat, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You thought you could stalk me at my own firm to beg for that ridiculous decoy car back. Get up. Get out of that chair right now. Go to the break room, fetch the partner's coffee, and wait by the service elevator until security escorts you to the pavement." Before I could utter a single word, Sylvia Kensington entered the room, her presence instantly silencing the murmuring lawyers. The senior managing partner possessed a reputation forged in absolute corporate ruthlessness. She wore a tailored black blazer, carrying a single manila folder containing the survival parameters of her firm. Her arrival acted as a localized vacuum, instantly sucking the remaining oxygen out of the glass enclosure. The attorneys snapped into rigid silence, straightening their spines and lowering their eyes. Nobody breathed. Valerie immediately pivoted, offering a loud, fawning apology to Sylvia for her deranged, impoverished sister's trespassing. She practically sprinted toward the center of the room, Intercepting Sylvia before the older woman could even assess the seating arrangement, Valerie needed to control the narrative. She needed to protect her fabricated prestige before the managing partner realized a destitute dropout had contaminated her pristine boardroom. "Sylvia, I apologize profusely for this massive security breach," Valerie announced, her voice echoing loudly in the dead, silent room. She gestured frantically toward my position at the head of the table, treating me like a stray animal that had wandered through an open door. I have no idea how she manipulated the front desk, but I am handling the situation immediately. This is my deranged, impoverished sister. She is currently undergoing a severe psychological episode, and she trespassed into the building to harass me. Montgomery nodded in synchronized agreement, retrieving his smartphone from his pocket. He held the device up, projecting the image of a decisive problem solver. "I am dialing building security as we speak. Ms. Kensington, we will have the intruder removed from your chair within 2 minutes." Sylvia Kensington stopped walking. The senior managing partner froze in the center of the room. Her sharp, calculating eyes darted from Valerie's flushed, frantic face to Montgomery's raised telephone. She absorbed the sheer, staggering absurdity of their claims. She then shifted her line of sight past the 2 junior employees, resting her gaze entirely on my immovable figure seated at the head of the petrified wood table. Sylvia noticed the silver logo of Pinnacle Restructuring Group glowing on the massive projection screens above my head. She recognized the heavy black forensic portfolio resting under my folded hands. She processed the terrifying reality that the junior associate was actively insulting the apex executioner, holding the firm's financial lifeline. The cognitive dissonance crashed over Sylvia like a physical wave. She hired a billionaire auditor to gut her failing company, and her lowest-ranking employee just ordered that auditor to fetch coffee. Sylvia frowned deeply, looked at Valerie with profound confusion, and said the single word that stopped the earth from spinning: "Wait!" The single syllable fell from Sylvia's lips, carrying the devastating weight of an absolute paradigm shift. The command froze Montgomery's thumb an inch above his smartphone screen. It paralyzed Valerie's frantic gesturing. The arrogant thieves stood stranded in the center of the room, entirely unaware that the glass walls surrounding them had just transformed into a fortified cage. The ambient noise in the boardroom completely evaporated as Sylvia turned her respectful, terrified gaze directly toward my seat. The next words left my sister frozen, pale, and completely silent. Sylvia Kensington stepped forward, her posture rigid, her tailored black blazer absorbing the harsh, recessed lighting of the executive boardroom. She did not placate Valerie. She did not acknowledge the junior associate's frantic, disrespectful outburst regarding a deranged trespasser. She ignored Montgomery's raised telephone and his empty threats to summon building security. Instead, the senior managing partner turned her back on the 2 junior employees and addressed the 30 elite litigators occupying the perimeter of the glass enclosure. "Take your seats immediately," Sylvia commanded, her voice slicing cleanly through the stale, suffocating air of the room. The legal staff scrambled to comply. The scraping of heavy leather chairs against the slate floor echoed throughout the transparent box as the attorneys dropped into their designated spots. They instinctively recognized the lethal shift in the atmospheric pressure. Sylvia, a woman who built her legacy on absolute corporate ruthlessness, projected a level of deference her staff had never witnessed. She turned her body, facing my position at the absolute head of the petrified wood table, and offered a short, respectful nod. "I apologize for the insubordination, Madam Chief Executive," Sylvia stated, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the crushing desperation anchoring her legacy. She pivoted slightly, ensuring every single lawyer in the room possessed a clear line of sight to my bespoke charcoal suit. "Everyone, direct your attention to the head of the table. I am officially introducing you to Liliana, the undisputed founder and chief executive officer of Pinnacle Restructuring Group." Sylvia formally addressed the room, introducing me as Liliana, the undisputed CEO of Pinnacle Restructuring Group and the apex auditor hired to gut their failing firm. "Liliana operates with our full, unyielding cooperation," Sylvia continued, hammering the final nails into their fabricated coffins. She possesses absolute authority to restructure our financial divisions, audit our internal ledgers, and terminate any employee deemed toxic to our continued survival. Her directives supersede my own. Valerie's jaw literally unhinged, her smug facade shattering into sheer, paralyzing terror. The crimson flush of her manufactured indignation vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly, translucent pallor. She stared at my seated figure, her pupils dilating wildly as her brain frantically tried to process the catastrophic paradigm shift. She gripped the edge of the petrified wood table to remain upright, her manicured fingers slipping erratically against the polished grain. The 3-carat cushion-cut diamond catching the light on her left hand suddenly transformed from a symbol of aristocratic supremacy into a glaring beacon of her impending doom. She looked at the bespoke wool of my suit. She looked at the heavy black forensic portfolio resting beneath my calloused hands. She looked at the massive projection screens suspended above my head, displaying the brushed steel logo of my empire. The cognitive dissonance crashed over Valerie like a collapsing building. This was the exact sister she had banished from the country club gala just 4 days prior. This was the woman she intentionally drenched in red wine to impress the very colleagues currently cowering in their seats. This was the destitute dropout she attempted to illegally evict onto a flooded concrete sidewalk less than 24 hours ago. She tried to open her mouth, desperately searching her paralyzed vocal cords for a rebuttal. But she produced absolutely nothing but a hollow, pathetic wheeze. She realized her forged academic transcripts and plagiarized legal filings no longer sat shielded behind the firm's bureaucracy. They rested directly in the crosshairs of my corporate execution order. Beside her, Montgomery's face instantly drained of all color, his arrogant posture crumbling as his mind desperately tried to process the impossible mathematics of my authority. He slowly lowered his arm, the smartphone sliding limply from his grip and clattering loudly against the boardroom table. The loud, arrogant partner who had strutted through the mahogany doors moments ago ceased to exist. His shoulders slumped forward, destroying the tailored lines of his bespoke pinstripe suit. He looked at Sylvia, searching for a lifeline, but the senior managing partner offered him absolutely nothing but a cold, dismissive glare. Montgomery swallowed hard, his throat visibly constricting. Thursday evening, he stood in a peeling decoy apartment and threatened to bury me in frivolous civil litigation. Monday morning, he finalized an illegal eviction to force my submission. Tuesday morning, he discovered he had actively terrorized the billionaire auditor currently holding his heavily padded timesheets and stolen client funds. The federal reality of his shadow billing network materialized before his eyes. He realized the illegal auto loan he forged using my social security number did not exploit a helpless barista. He had committed federal identity theft against a corporate titan possessing limitless legal resources. He recognized that the woman sitting at the head of the table did not just possess the power to fire him. She possessed the verified forensic evidence required to send him to a maximum security penitentiary for the next 2 decades. I did not smile. I did not offer a single word of familial greeting. I did not acknowledge the shared bloodline connecting me to the hyperventilating junior associate clinging to the table. In this glass enclosure, we did not exist as siblings. I operated strictly as the corporate executioner, and she functioned merely as a bloated liability, waiting for surgical amputation. I let the silence stretch, forcing the arrogant thieves to drown in the suffocating reality of their total, inescapable ruin. The 30 elite attorneys sitting around the perimeter held their collective breath, their eyes darting between my silent, immovable figure and the 2 terrified employees standing trapped in the center aisle. I raised my hands from the table and placed them deliberately on the heavy black leather. I simply unclasped the heavy black forensic portfolio, letting the metal lock click loudly in the silent room, and announced that the liquidity audit was officially underway. The sharp mechanical snap echoed violently off the transparent glass walls, causing Montgomery to flinch as if struck by a physical blow. I flipped the thick leather cover open, exposing the stack of crisp, densely printed documents detailing their unmitigated greed. I tapped the titanium drive plugged into the table, shifting the massive projection screens from the company logo to the Stark. unforgiving grid of the firm's internal ledgers. "The preliminary pleasantries are concluded," I stated, my voice a flat, lethal murmur that resonated clearly through the acoustic dampening panels embedded in the ceiling. "The structural liabilities threatening this institution are severe, deeply embedded, and entirely unacceptable. We will now begin the surgical extraction." Valerie stumbled backward, her expensive stiletto heels scraping uselessly against the dark slate of floor. She bumped into an empty leather chair, collapsing into the seat because her legs refused to support her body weight. She stared at me, a single tear of pure, unadulterated terror breaching her waterline and tracing a jagged path down her pale cheek. She wanted to scream. She wanted her parents to storm the room and restore her golden child illusion. But her parents could not save her from the federal guillotine hovering directly above her neck. I ignored her pathetic display. I focused my gaze entirely on the ruined mid-level partner standing frozen beside her. Montgomery grasped the edge of the table, his knuckles bleaching white under the blinding recessed lights. I watched Montgomery's hands begin to tremble violently against the polished wood as I turned to the first page of their undeniable ruin. I systematically dismantled their fabricated careers line by meticulous line. I rested my fingertips against the mechanical keys of the encrypted terminal embedded in the petrified wood table. The 30 elite litigators occupying the perimeter of the glass enclosure held their collective breath, the silence stretching so taut it threatened to snap. I did not raise my voice to match the aggressive, frantic energy Valerie and Montgomery had brought into the room just minutes prior. I operated with the lethal, unhurried precision of a surgeon standing over an exposed artery. I struck the execution key. The 3 massive projection screens suspended above my head flickered, abandoning the stark silver logo of Pinnacle Restructuring Group. The displays flooded with high-definition financial architecture. With a single keystroke, I projected Montgomery's fraudulent shadow billing network across the massive boardroom screens. The center monitor illuminated with Montgomery's employee identification photograph, flanked by 3 dense columns of raw, extracted banking data. Glowing crimson vectors connected his secure firm-issued login credentials directly to 3 unregistered shell corporations housed in Delaware. I did not summarize his crimes. I forced the entire room to read the undeniable mathematics of his staggering greed. "We begin the audit with the mid-level partnership division," I announced, locking my gaze directly onto Montgomery. He stood paralyzed beside the table, the color completely draining from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. I exposed every padded invoice and stolen client fund in high definition. Over the preceding 3 fiscal quarters, Montgomery systematically targeted mid-sized logistics clients and regional manufacturing firms, I stated, pressing the spacebar to advance the slide. The screen magnified a series of complex billing invoices. He selected vulnerable accounts lacking dedicated internal auditing departments. He then artificially inflated his consultation timesheets by exactly 40%. A low, collective murmur of shock rippled through the seated attorneys. However, he did not merely overbill the firm's clients. I continued, slicing through their murmurs with absolute authority. I advanced to the next slide, displaying the exact routing numbers and digital wire receipts. He siphoned the excess capital directly from Kensington and Reed's primary escrow accounts. He routed the stolen liquidity through ghost vendor invoices, washing the money before depositing it into his personal offshore holdings. I highlighted the final column, showcasing the hundreds of thousands of dollars he utilized to lease his luxury sports cars, purchase his bespoke Italian suits, and finance the massive diamond engagement ring currently glinting on my sister's trembling finger. Montgomery gripped the edge of the petrified wood, his knuckles bleaching stark white. He opened his mouth, desperately attempting to project the dominant aura he utilized during his illegal evictions. "That is a clerical anomaly," he choked out, spit flying from his dry lips. "A software error in the billing client. I can explain the routing logic." "You cannot explain away verified internet protocol logs," I countered, my voice flat and completely devoid of empathy. The digital forensic footprints map the illicit wire transfers directly to your secure terminal. You actively embezzled from the very clients you swore a fiduciary duty to protect. I abandoned his pathetic, stuttering defense and shifted my focus to the hyperventilating woman clinging to the leather chair beside him. The structural decay extends significantly downward into your junior associate pool, I stated, turning my attention to the senior managing partner. I then flipped the screen to display Valerie's forged academic transcripts and heavily plagiarized legal filings. The left monitor split into two distinct, high-definition panels. On one side rested the pristine, digitally altered transcript Valerie submitted to Human Resources during her onboarding process. On the other side glowed the verified, encrypted document I extracted directly from her university registrar. Valerie Caldwell lacked the intellectual capacity to secure an interview at this institution, I explained, forcing her to stare at the undeniable proof of her inadequacy. She artificially inflated her grade point average and fabricated a prestigious academic honors designation to bypass your initial hiring filters. Valerie gasped, her hands flying to her throat as if the oxygen had suddenly evaporated from the glass boardroom. The academic fraud merely constitutes the initial infraction, I added, tapping the terminal to swap the display to her recent casework. Blocks of glaring, neon red text flooded the massive screens. Our proprietary plagiarism detection software highlighted 95% of her submitted documents. Valerie lacked the foundational competence required to draft original antitrust arguments, I continued, ensuring every senior partner in the room understood the catastrophic liability she introduced to their dockets. To survive her initial 2 weeks of employment, she accessed the firm's historical digital archives. She downloaded complex merger blueprints authored by senior partners, swapped the client headers, altered the dates, and submitted the stolen intellectual property as her own original legal strategy. She committed severe, documentable malpractice. Sylvia Kensington's face flushed with unadulterated rage at the massive liability sitting at her table. The senior managing partner pushed herself up from her leather chair, her palms slapping flat against the polished wood. Her pristine legacy, the law firm she built over 3 decades, currently harbored active federal criminals who had jeopardized multi-million-dollar corporate mergers to fund their country club fantasies. The realization that she had paid these parasites exorbitant salaries while her firm hovered on the edge of bankruptcy pushed her over the edge of rational composure. "You forged official firm documents," Sylvia hissed, her voice a lethal, vibrating whip that cracked across the silent boardroom. She glared at Montgomery, then snapped her furious gaze to Valerie. "You stole from our verified escrow accounts. You submitted plagiarized, fraudulent filings under the Kensington and Reed letterhead." She did not hesitate. Sylvia instantly terminated both of them on the spot, promising severe legal action. "You are fired, effective this exact second," Sylvia commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the heavy mahogany doors. "I am contacting the State Bar Association immediately to initiate your permanent, unchallengeable disbarment. Furthermore, I am handing these verified ledgers directly to federal prosecutors. You will spend the next 20 years rotting in a penitentiary for wire fraud and embezzlement." The absolute finality of Sylvia's decree shattered the fragile, manufactured reality the two parasites inhabited. The aristocratic illusion they had violently protected at the engagement gala completely vaporized. Montgomery's knees buckled. The bespoke pinstripe suit bunched awkwardly around his shoulders as his legs simply refused to support his body weight. Montgomery dropped to his knees on the dark slate floor, begging me for mercy. He crawled forward, his polished Oxfords dragging against the stone tiles. The arrogant corporate litigator who had stood in my decoy apartment just days prior, threatening to bury me in frivolous civil litigation, dissolved into a weeping, frantic child. "Liliana, please," Montgomery babbled, clasping his hands together in a desperate, pathetic gesture of supplication. Tears streamed down his pale cheeks, ruining his meticulously groomed facade. "I can reverse the transfers. I will sell the cars. I will pay the money back. Do not give the forensic files to the authorities. We are family. You cannot do this to your own family." I looked down at his sobbing, ruined form. I did not offer him a single shred of salvation. I did not remind him that he had finalized an illegal eviction against his family less than 24 hours ago. I simply stared at him with impenetrable, terrifying silence. Beside him, the crushing magnitude of her total destruction violently collided with Valerie's ego. Valerie hyperventilated, clutching her chest as she realized the failure she had relentlessly mocked now possessed total, absolute control over her existence. She gasped for air, her throat audibly constricting as panic seized her respiratory system. She clawed at the collar of her expensive tailored blouse. The 3-carat cushion-cut diamond on her finger felt like a federal tracking device, a glowing beacon of the stolen capital that would inevitably send her to a concrete cell. She looked at the massive screens broadcasting her academic fraud. She looked at her fiancé weeping on the slate floor. She looked at me, sitting untouched and unbothered in the high-backed leather chair. The destitute dropout she had intentionally drenched in red wine, the invisible scapegoat she ordered out of her graduation party, held the unchallengeable power to authorize her federal execution, her mind entirely fractured under the weight of the undeniable truth. The 30 elite litigators sitting around the perimeter stared at the weeping, broken couple with unvarnished revulsion. They instinctively pulled their chairs backward, desperate to distance themselves from the blast radius of the impending federal indictments. I raised my right hand, catching the attention of the 2 heavily armed corporate security officers stationed in the corridor outside the transparent glass walls. I signaled the corporate security guards, watching with cold detachment as they physically hauled the weeping, broken couple out of the glass boardroom. The shockwave of their termination hit my parents exactly as their predatory financial house of cards collapsed. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut, sealing the glass boardroom and cutting off the muffled, pathetic pleas of the disgraced attorneys. I did not waste a single second savoring the quiet. I returned my attention to the titanium drive plugged into the petrified wood table. My fingers struck the mechanical keys, initiating the secondary phase of the corporate execution. Sylvia Kensington stood rigid near the window, watching me systematically lock down the corrupted infrastructure of her firm. The remaining 30 elite litigators sat in absolute, paralyzed silence, witnessing a hostile financial takeover executed with surgical, undeniable precision. I isolated Montgomery's internal routing numbers and executed a total, uncompromising freeze on his financial profiles. The digital locks clamped shut. I severed his access to the firm's escrow accounts, his payroll disbursements, and his shadow billing shell corporations. The monitors overhead flashed a series of green confirmation codes, verifying the absolute neutralization of his stolen liquidity. This action triggered a catastrophic chain reaction far beyond the glass walls of the skyscraper. Gregory and Brenda had constructed their manufactured aristocratic lifestyle entirely on borrowed capital. They leveraged high-interest bridge loans from aggressive shadow lenders to fund the engagement gala at the Botanical Gardens, to secure the exorbitant catering and floral deposits. My parents utilized Montgomery's verified partnership income and future corporate bonuses as the primary collateral. The moment Montgomery's firm accounts were frozen, the predatory bridge loans my parents took out immediately defaulted. The lenders did not offer grace periods. They did not send polite warning letters. They initiated immediate, aggressive asset seizure protocols to recoup their exposed capital. My parents' bank accounts, previously bloated by stolen credit, drained to absolute zero in a matter of milliseconds. I watched the banking ledgers plummet on my secondary screen, tracing the exact moment their fabricated dynasty hit the bedrock of total bankruptcy. I shifted my focus to the encrypted dossier containing the forged auto loan. Gregory and Brenda believed they had successfully weaponized my social security number to secure the midnight blue Mercedes-Benz. They assumed their digital notary manipulation remained entirely undetected, granting them free access to a $140,000 status symbol. I utilized my terminal to trigger the federal fraud alerts on the auto loan they had illegally tied to my social security number. I bypassed the standard consumer reporting channels. I routed the verified internet protocol logs, the forged electronic signatures, and the undeniable proof of criminal conspiracy directly to the dealership's underwriting department and the primary national credit bureaus. I attached my corporate authentication, certifying the transmission as a priority federal fraud intervention. The response materialized instantly on my monitor. The lender's automated systems flagged the vehicle contract as a severe criminal liability. The finance company instantly revoked the funding, labeling the luxury sedan a stolen asset. They dispatched an emergency recovery order to a localized repossession firm, categorizing the vehicle for immediate, hostile extraction. I accessed the Kensington and Reed internal security mainframe, pulling the live closed-circuit camera feeds onto my projection screens. I focused the visual feed on the subterranean parking garage beneath the skyscraper. Within 20 minutes, aggressive repo agents arrived at the law firm parking garage to physically seize Valerie's brand-new Mercedes. A heavy, battered tow truck breached the security gate, shattering the wooden barrier arm and ignoring the frantic protests of the parking attendant. The heavy diesel engine roared, echoing violently against the concrete pillars. Two burly recovery agents jumped from the cab. They did not carry clipboards or attempt to negotiate with the valet staff. They marched directly to the reserved partner parking bays, locating the gleaming midnight blue sedan. One agent jammed a slim metal tool into the driver's side door, bypassing the electronic locks in under 30 seconds. His partner positioned the hydraulic lift beneath the front axle. The luxury vehicle, the ultimate symbol of Valerie's fabricated high society supremacy, hoisted violently into the air. The agent secured the heavy steel chains, completely ignoring the shrill, piercing blare of the car's anti-theft alarm. They dragged the stolen asset out of the garage, neutralizing the final physical remnant of my sister's fraudulent wealth. The blinking taillights disappeared up the concrete ramp, leaving behind an empty parking space and a spreading puddle of motor oil. 10 miles away, the digital detonation struck my parents' mobile devices. Gregory and Brenda experienced the financial collapse in real time. Their banking applications locked, their credit lines vaporized. Aggressive collection agencies flooded their voicemails with automated legal threats. They panicked. They needed their golden child and her elite litigator fiancé to deploy their supposed legal prowess and fix the catastrophic errors instantly. I switched the camera feed to the ground floor marble lobby, anticipating their chaotic arrival. Gregory and Brenda sprinted into the Kensington and Reed marble lobby in an absolute panic. They abandoned their manufactured aristocratic grace entirely. Gregory's expensive cashmere coat flapped wildly behind him. His face flushed a deep, mottled purple as he shoved his way past a group of startled couriers. Brenda struggled to maintain her footing on the polished stone, her designer handbag swinging erratically as she rushed toward the primary security desk. They demanded immediate access to the executive floors. They shouted Montgomery's name, pounding their fists against the marble counter, ordering the reception staff to summon the junior partner to resolve their sudden, inexplicable bankruptcies. The receptionist reached for his telephone to summon backup, his eyes widening at their unhinged behavior. They arrived just in time to watch uniformed security forcefully escort their weeping, disgraced golden child and her ruined fiancé out of the elevators. The brushed steel doors parted with a soft, melodic chime, revealing a scene of absolute, unmitigated devastation. Two massive corporate security officers marched out of the cabin, gripping Montgomery tightly by his upper arms, the bespoke pinstripe suit bunched awkwardly around his neck. He dragged his polished Oxfords against the marble, weeping openly, his face a wet, swollen mask of pure terror. He clutched a cardboard box containing the pathetic, mundane remnants of his office supplies. Valerie stumbled behind him, her stiletto heels scraping uselessly against the stone. She hyperventilated, clawing at her throat as if the oxygen in the lobby had suddenly turned to ash. Her expensive tailored blouse hung wrinkled and disheveled. Mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, ruining her meticulously applied makeup. The security guards possessed zero patience for her theatrical panic. They shoved her roughly toward the revolving glass doors, completely stripping away the invisible shield of privilege she believed she possessed. Gregory and Brenda halted dead in their tracks. The frantic demands died in their throats. They watched the security personnel confiscate Valerie's and Montgomery's building access badges, snapping the plastic cards in half before tossing the pieces into a nearby waste receptacle. The guards shoved the weeping couple through the heavy glass exit, locking the doors behind them and banishing them onto the freezing concrete pavement. The parents stood paralyzed in the lobby, staring in absolute horror as the pristine illusion of their aristocratic dynasty shattered onto the marble floor. I descended into the lobby 10 minutes later, my heavy leather heels echoing like a metronome of their destruction. The brushed steel elevator doors parted with a soft, melodic chime, releasing me into the sprawling marble expanse of the ground floor. I carried the heavy black forensic portfolio in my left hand, maintaining an upright, uncompromising posture. The chaotic energy that recently infected the reception area lingered in the stale, over-conditioned air, but the corporate security guards had re-established the perimeter, forming a rigid human barricade near the exit. I navigated the polished stone, moving with the measured, predatory grace of a chief executive who had just surgically amputated a diseased limb from a multi-million-dollar corporation. Gregory and Brenda remained anchored near the center of the atrium, completely paralyzed by the violent expulsion of their golden child. They clutched their cashmere coats, their faces pale and drawn, attempting to process the catastrophic evaporation of their fabricated dynasty. Then, the sharp, rhythmic strike of my heels caught their attention. They pivoted simultaneously, their bloodshot eyes locked onto my approaching figure. They expected the impoverished, invisible scapegoat. They anticipated the defeated woman they had illegally evicted into a freezing rainstorm just 24 hours prior. Instead, they absorbed the visual impact of my bespoke charcoal power suit, the crisp silk blouse, and the terrifying, unyielding authority radiating from my frame. The cognitive dissonance fractured their remaining composure. They connected the digital dots. They realized the billionaire corporate auditor who had just terminated Montgomery and seized his illicit accounts was the exact daughter they had ruthlessly discarded. Gregory and Brenda spotted my bespoke suit and immediately rushed toward me. They abandoned any remaining shreds of their manufactured aristocratic grace, scrambling across the marble tiles like desperate, cornered animals. Their expensive leather shoes slipped erratically on the polished stone. They blocked my path to the revolving doors, their hands trembling violently, their chests heaving with rapid, shallow gasps. They desperately attempted a sickening pivot, suddenly praising my brilliant success and pleading with me to bail them out of their impending bankruptcies. "Liliana, thank God," Gregory stammered, attempting to mold his face into an expression of profound paternal pride. The facade cracked instantly, his voice hitched, stripping away his blustering, artificial dominance. He reached out, his palms sweating, gesturing wildly toward the ceiling. "We knew you possessed incredible talent. We always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. You built a magnificent enterprise, sweetheart. You tricked us perfectly. It was a brilliant test." Brenda stepped forward, attempting to grasp the sleeve of my blazer. I shifted my weight backward, stepping fluidly out of her reach. Her manicured hand grasped at empty air, dropping limply to her side. "Darling, please listen to us," Brenda begged, tears carving jagged tracks through her heavy foundation. "A catastrophic error occurred with our banking institutions. The accounts locked. The lenders froze our credit lines. Shadow creditors are threatening to seize our property. They towed Valerie's vehicle from the garage. You have to wire us capital immediately. You are a chief executive. You possess limitless resources. We are your family." I stopped walking, letting their frantic, tearful begging wash over me. I stared at them with absolute, terrifying coldness. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their hysterical, panting energy. I operated as an impenetrable fortress of ice, examining the two architects of my lifelong torment as they crumbled into ash. "You claim we are family," I began, my voice a flat, lethal murmur that echoed off the veined marble pillars. "Let us review your definition of that word." I methodically recounted the decade they spent treating me like garbage, prioritizing Valerie's fabricated status over my silent sacrifices. 10 years ago, I stated, holding Gregory's terrified gaze, refusing to let him look away. The bank nailed a neon orange foreclosure notice to your front door. I possessed an acceptance letter to a top-tier law program. I surrendered my deposit. I withdrew my enrollment. I worked 80-hour weeks, scrubbing corporate ledgers and analyzing financial spreadsheets until my eyes bled, simply to satisfy your outstanding mortgage and keep a roof over your heads. Gregory swallowed hard, his throat constricting visibly. Brenda clamped a hand over her mouth, her chest heaving as the oxygen slowly evacuated her lungs. The absolute second the debt cleared, you developed profound amnesia. I continued, meticulously dissecting their crimes. You erased my sacrifice to protect your fragile egos. You funneled every remaining cent into grooming Valerie. You bought her designer dresses while I shopped at thrift stores. You celebrated her fabricated accomplishments while you treated my very existence as a suffocating burden. You valued the illusion of wealth over the reality of loyalty. We made mistakes. Gregory choked out, his knees visibly buckling under the weight of his undeniable guilt. We were misguided. But we can fix this. You have the money to fix this. 4 days ago, I whispered, stepping closer, forcing them to cower under my shadow. You stood in a country club ballroom. You watched Valerie drench me in red wine and brand me the biggest failure in this family. You looked away. You sanctioned the abuse. Yesterday morning, you stood under a golf umbrella in a torrential downpour, watching a corrupt property manager dump my decoy furniture into the gutter. You attempted to force my total submission by weaponizing homelessness. That was tough love, Brenda shrieked, grasping at a delusional, pathetic defense. We wanted to push you to succeed. We wanted you to stop living in that squalor. We did it for your own good. I lived in that squalor to provide a mirror for your monumental greed, I corrected, slicing through her transparent lie with surgical precision. And you failed the test completely. You did not offer shelter. You demanded my savings. You fraudulently utilized my social security number to co-sign a predatory auto loan for a daughter who plagiarized her way into a law firm. You committed federal identity theft. You anchored your own sinking ship to a stolen anvil. Liliana, please, Gregory pleaded, weeping openly now, the tears soaking his expensive cashmere collar. Montgomery is ruined. Valerie is facing disbarment. The shadow lenders will seize the house. You cannot abandon us to federal debt collectors. You cannot let your own parents rot in bankruptcy. I am not abandoning you, I replied, ensuring every syllable carried the weight of absolute finality. I am simply executing the exact financial boundary you demanded. You chose your golden child. You funded her fraudulent career. You built a house of cards on a foundation of unmitigated arrogance. And I merely pulled the bottom card. I refused to offer them a single cent of salvation, establishing a permanent, impenetrable boundary. My wealth belongs exclusively to me, I declared, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation or future contact. You will not receive a single dollar. You will face the bankruptcy courts. You will face the aggressive creditors. You will face the consequences of your toxic entitlement entirely alone. Do not attempt to contact my corporation, and do not attempt to approach this building ever again. Their pathetic sobbing echoed in the massive lobby, a hollow, desperate sound bouncing off the glass walls. They fell against each other, physically collapsing under the realization that their aristocratic dynasty was permanently, irrevocably dead. I did not feel a solitary shred of pity. The execution was flawless, the parasite severed, and my empire secured. I turned my back on their pathetic sobbing, walking smoothly through the revolving glass doors toward my waiting armored SUV. 6 months later, the bitter winter yielded to a bright, unburdened spring. The karma delivered was absolute and comprehensive. The federal authorities did not hesitate, nor did they offer lenient plea agreements. The heavy black leather forensic portfolio I surrendered to the regulatory agencies contained an airtight, impenetrable matrix of digital evidence. The prosecuting attorneys utilized the verified Internet protocol logs, the forged electronic signatures, and the undeniable wire transfer receipts to secure immediate grand jury indictments. Valerie and Montgomery faced severe federal indictments for their respective wire fraud and embezzlement crimes. The State Bar Association moved with ruthless, mechanical efficiency. The disciplinary committee convened an emergency tribunal, reviewing the plagiarized legal filings and the shadow billing ledgers. They formally stripped Valerie and Montgomery of their law licenses, permanently severing their access to the legal profession. The university registrar, acting upon the irrefutable proof of academic fraud I provided, officially revoked Valerie's undergraduate and law degrees. The academic elite completely erased her fabricated legacy from their alumni records. The catastrophic legal battle instantly vaporized their remaining stolen liquidity. The federal courts mandated massive restitution payments, ordering the immediate seizure of their physical assets. Asset forfeiture units confiscated the luxury sports cars Montgomery leased. Federal agents reclaimed the 3-carat cushion-cut diamond ring Valerie flaunted at the country club gala, locking the gemstone inside an evidence vault. Stripped of their law licenses, they were forced to work minimum-wage retail jobs just to afford their discount defense attorneys. Montgomery traded his bespoke Italian pinstripes for a scratchy, polyester uniform polo. He spends his days hauling heavy cardboard boxes in a massive, fluorescent-lit warehouse store, operating a manual pallet jack under the relentless scrutiny of a shift manager. The arrogant, posturing corporate litigator vanished, replaced by an exhausted laborer, drowning in unpayable legal debt. Valerie operates a cash register at a discount department store. Her manicured hands, previously accustomed to holding crystal champagne flutes, now scan clearance merchandise for impatient shoppers. The manufactured aristocratic sneer dissolved entirely. She stands behind a plastic counter for 8 hours a day, staring at the barcode scanner, suffocating under the crushing realization that her fabricated superiority led directly to a concrete floor. They clock in, they clock out, and they surrender their meager paychecks directly to the discount defense attorneys, desperately trying to shave a few years off their impending federal prison sentences. Gregory and Brenda experienced a parallel, devastating collapse. The moment the aggressive shadow lenders triggered the default clauses on their predatory bridge loans, the financial contagion spread rapidly to their primary assets. The lenders initiated immediate, hostile extraction protocols. The bank dispatched an agent to nail a neon orange foreclosure notice to the heavy oak front door of their sprawling suburban estate. It mirrored the exact neon orange notice I intercepted 10 years prior. This time, however, no invisible scapegoat existed to absorb the impact. I watched the municipal property records update from my secure terminal. I allowed the bank to seize the property entirely. Gregory and Brenda lost the family home to foreclosure, the very home I had saved a decade prior. The repossession crews arrived in a fleet of heavy diesel trucks. They bypassed the manicured lawns, marching through the double doors to confiscate the antique furniture, the imported rugs, and the expensive artwork my parents utilized to project generational wealth. The neighbors watched from their pristine driveways as the repo men hauled the fabricated dynasty piece by piece into the back of a moving van. The social fallout hit them with the devastating force of a physical blow. The Oak Ridge Country Club Board of Directors issued a formal hand-delivered expulsion letter. They were exiled from their country club, their memberships permanently revoked due to unpaid dues, and the toxic, highly publicized federal scandal clinging to their name. The elite socialites they spent decades desperately trying to impress severed all contact, blocking their phone numbers and ignoring their frantic emails. Stripped of their credit lines and their stolen prestige, they retreated to the shadows. They currently resided in a cramped, damp apartment on the city's industrial edge. The poetic justice anchored itself in the architecture of their new reality. The peeling linoleum floors, the flickering fluorescent bulbs, and the rattling baseboard heaters perfectly mirrored the decoy studio apartment they mocked so mercilessly. The faint stench of boiled cabbage drifts through their rusted ventilation shafts. Gregory hauls his meager, discounted groceries up 3 flights of cracked concrete stairs, his expensive cashmere coats long, sold to pawnbrokers. Brenda stares out a grime-streaked window overlooking a congested, noisy freight yard, suffocating under the undeniable reality that her manufactured empire collapsed into dust. They orchestrated an illegal eviction to weaponize homelessness against me. The universe answered by permanently revoking their shelter. I did not monitor their misery. I completely severed the digital tracking algorithms. I discarded the burner phone and dismantled the decoy identity entirely. I severed the infected branch, allowing the rot to consume them while I secured the trunk of my own existence. I sat in my corner office, expanding the reach of Pinnacle Restructuring Group, finally breathing the clean air of true, unbothered peace. The panoramic windows of the 40th floor offered an unobstructed, sprawling view of the glittering Chicago skyline. The spring sunlight cascaded across the polished slate tile, illuminating the massive obsidian desk anchoring the room. The empire I built in the shadows now operated in the unyielding, brilliant light of absolute success. I signed a massive acquisition contract, absorbing 3 regional auditing firms, officially scaling my corporate footprint across the eastern seaboard. My elite forensic accountants occupied the glass-walled war rooms down the hall, dissecting bloated conglomerates and engineering structural salvations. The towering server racks hummed with a steady, cooling vibration, establishing the rhythm of my undisputed domain. I no longer hid my bespoke charcoal suits beneath oversized, thrifted sweaters. I no longer navigated the city in a rusted sedan to appease the fragile egos of parasites. I wore my armor openly, my heavy leather heels striking the polished floors of my headquarters, commanding the absolute respect of the industry I quietly conquered. I poured a glass of sparkling water, the crystal tumbler cold against my palm, and looked out over the city grid. The silence in the penthouse did not feel isolating. It felt sacred. The story proves that setting yourself on fire to keep toxic family members warm only leaves you in ashes. True empowerment requires walking away and building your own untouchable empire in the silence. If you believe that silent endurance eventually brings the loudest victories, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own stories of setting boundaries in the comments below.